Well, today we have Jean Bartik, who has graciously agreed to do an oral history for the Computer History Museum. Thank you very much for being with us, Jean.
Well, thank you for having me.
I think I'd like to start with a little bit of your family background, if you don't mind, where you were born and a little bit about the family you were born into.
Oh, well, I come from a long line of school teachers and farmers. My father was a school teacher and a farmer, and I was born in Gentry County, Missouri, about 2 miles outside a little town called Alanthus Grove, and it had a population of 104. So I'm the sixth of 7 children. I have 3 brothers, had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and all of them are now gone except me. And so I was the sixth of 7. So I grew up in a big, noisy family, and even it's kind of interesting. Even though I grew up in a big family, I was sort of lonely, and the reason I was lonely in this big family is that being the sixth, nobody ever listened to me because everything that I was doing, they'd already done a long time ago, and they weren't interested in my stories. And I used to go out in the pasture and lie down in the grass and look up at the sky, and then I could just imagine anything I liked, and nobody had anything to say. So I really liked that, and actually, I never acquired any fame of any kind in my family until it turned out I was a good softball pitcher, because it was interesting. I went to a little one-room school, and in order to have enough kids to play on a team, we played, softball from the time we were in first grade. So it turned out that when I got to be in 6th and 7th grade, I could pitch better than anybody else. So I used to pitch, and I used to practice. I flattened out a tin can and nailed it to the smokehouse, and then I used to go out and practice my control pitching at it. So then finally, the manager of the team in Stanberry, Missouri, now this is a town of about 2,000 that was 9 miles away, heard about me. So he came to ask my father if I could play on the team. So I did, and I was quite a star. So there used to be, stories about me in the newspaper, and when I would go to town with my mother, people would stop me on the street, and particularly men, and tell me what I'd done wrong in the last game and how I should do things. And one time I was in town with my mother, and the owner of the pool hall came out and started telling me what was wrong with how I pitched the week before and blah, blah, blah. So I didn't even know the man, but my mother said, "I'm not going to go to town with you anymore if you're going to have those ornery old men coming out and talk to you." So, but many people stopped to talk to me that I didn't know. Right. So anyway, that was my first time that I got any particularly recognition in my family.
For something, yes. Now, this was a girls' softball team?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they were very, very popular because it was before TV or even very much radio. Yeah. So everybody came out when the girls play. In fact, the boys liked for us to play with a doubleheader with them, because then everybody in town would come out and they would see their game, because they were very interested in this. And we went around to other little towns and played in the area, and we would go by a truck or sometimes in a number of cars. And one time we were in a truck. We went to Tarkio, Missouri, and the truck, he thought he knew a shortcut, and it broke through a bridge. So they tried to get it out, and they couldn't get it out, and they finally had to wake up some old farmer to pull them out with a team of horses. So we didn't get home till about 5 o'clock in the morning, and when we came into the town of Albany where we'd left our car, because my sister could drive. I mean, I wasn't old enough to drive, but my older sister would take me to the games and she would drive. So we got there, and there was my father standing out there by the car. He said, "Get in the car." And he said, "That's the end of your softball career." So he drove us home, and he made us do the chores and everything else before he'd let us sleep. And anyway, one of my uncles, Uncle Fred, came up and said he would take me to the games. And anyway, my father finally relented.
Yes.
And let me play again.
He was just angry at the moment. He
was scared.
Yeah,
I mean, he
as
was
to what was
frightened.
going to happen to you, yeah.
Because he had no idea
Where you were
where
or what
we
was
were
going
or
on.
what had happened. I mean, we should have been home, by about 1 o'clock in the morning. And he woke up in the middle of the night and realized we weren't home. And he'd walked to my uncle's house to have him get the car, to go out and look for us.
Wow.
So anyway.
All right.
Now,
when would that have been? What?
Well, I actually quit by the time I was a sophomore in high school. So it was when I was about 10, 11, 12 years old.
And how old? What year would that have been?
Well, I was born in 1924, so
30. You would have been 10 and 34.
If I was 10 or 12, it'd been 34.
Okay.
Etc. In that era,
Good.
34 to 36.
Now, was your mother basically stayed at home?
Yes, but my mother, well, we were all good in math in my family, so the fact that I was good in math wasn't particularly noted. Because, my mother she had just graduated from the 8th grade, and her family, they lived out in the country, and it's kind of hard for people to believe how hard it was for kids to even go to high school. Because my older brothers and sisters, there were no school buses or anything, and they had to live in town. And you leave home. I mean, my brother, had rooms with other people, and some of them, brothers and sisters, stayed with my grandmother. And one year, 2 brothers and a sister had an apartment. And
So they could go to high school.
So they could go to high school.
My goodness.
So anyway, my mother had not, she just went to the 8th grade, but back in those days, the state would pay for those farm kids to go to school, even to grammar school, 2 years beyond if they wanted to, and my mother did.
Oh.
And she was very good in math. I mean, she was great in algebra and geometry. She was as good as my father. And so she was she could do anything. She built a room on the house. They lived in a small house and had these children, so she just built a room.
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
Yeah.
she was a wonderful woman, and she could sew better than Christian Dior. I mean, she could make patterns, and she was unbelievable in that respect.
Okay.
And cook and everything. I mean, she was talented in all different directions. Plus, she was a wonderful mother. I mean, she never jumped on you when you were down. She always said, "Well, I know you'll do better next time," and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I know a lot of parents, you'll see them when something bad happens to their child, then they'll begin to tell them all the bad things they know about them. But she never did that.
Okay.
Never did that.
Well, that sounds like she was a good influence and a good role model.
It's kind of interesting, and we used to tease him about it. Dad was 20 years old when he met her, and she was 26. And she had gone around with this young man since she was young. And in fact, she had a ring.
Oh my goodness.
He
All right.
had given her a ring, and so anyway, she met Dad, and apparently it was just they just fell for each other like a ton of bricks. And so he told her to get rid of that ring. So she went out and threw it in a well.
Oh my goodness.
And we knew where that well was located. We considered that very romantic. And so anyway, when they were married, he was, she was 26 or so. I mean, because they were married, within a year. So I think she was like 26 and he was 20. And we used to tease her about robbing the cradle. And she didn't mind, but he did. My father didn't like
Oh.
it. He didn't like it when we said that. But anyway, so...
So she was 6 years older, yeah, than your
Yeah,
father.
she was.
Okay.
And they adored each other. I mean, it was
That's
really
wonderful.
wonderful. Yeah,
It's wonderful to grow up with a relationship where
yeah.
the parents
that's
really
true.
like each other.
That's true.
Hmm.
That's true.
What are your earliest memories of what you thought you might want to do when you grew up?
Well, I had a brother named Bob, who was he was third from the top, and he always said he wanted to be a doctor. So he always took care of any sick animal, or he used to caponize chickens, and I used to help him. And he was always going to be a doctor. So I thought, well, gee, I'd be a nurse, and the two of us would go out and cure everybody in the world.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But, I mean, it was because I particularly liked him and enjoyed being around him. And so when I was in high school, a lot of medical terms come from Latin, and my school didn't teach Latin. So my English teacher named Miss Madeira had Latin, so she said if I would come over one night a week, we could study Latin.
Oh.
So I used to go over to her house one night a week, and we would study Latin, and I would tell her all these wonderful dreams I had. Well, anyway, I mean, that didn't last because he started a medical school, but actually flunked out. And that sounds pretty terrible, but he was working and trying to work his way through. He didn't have any money. So
Oh, yes.
it was a combination of him not having enough time to study and stuff. So by this time, the rumbling of World War II was coming on, so he went into the Navy. And he was in the Navy before Pearl Harbor, actually.
Mhm.
And so then when I went to college, when I was in high school, I was the editor of our little newspaper that we ran in the paper. So I thought, oh, well, I'll be a journalism major. So I went to college. And
Well, now, yeah, let's back up. Had any of your, all of your siblings before you gone to college? Or
oh, yeah, everybody.
Oh,
And
your
it's
parents
very
were
interesting.
determined to send everybody
Oh, yeah,
to college.
and it's interesting that my mother was more determined than anyone because she knew how much she wanted to go to high school and education. So, and of course my father had gone to college, and even my grandmother, they went to normal schools to
Okay.
teach school back at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, my father was teaching school when he was 17 years old. Because my grandmother sent him to school when he was 4.
Oh, my goodness.
So he went to high school, and then when he went to normal school, well, at that time, you could teach school just by going to normal school like a year or something. So he had students when he was taught school older than he was.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So
All right.
anyway, and my oldest brother got married young, and my 2 sisters were school teachers, older sisters, and then my brother Raymond, he went to college, and I did, but by the time he went to college, it was time for World War II, and he was taking civilian pilots training, getting ready, because ahead of time we really knew we were going to be in war. So they had a civilian pilot's training, and he took the lessons, and then he went to college mainly as an adjunct to those, navigation problems and things like that.
Okay.
They taught courses at the Teachers College in conjunction with the civilian flight school.
All right, good.
Yeah, and
Okay.
my brother Raymond was the real entrepreneur of our family. I mean, he was always able to make money and stuff, and he went to Minnesota with my brother-in-law, and they leased land and rented headers and stuff, and they headed bluegrass. And so he worked all that summer, and he ended up with $2,000, which in 1945 was a lot of money.
That's right.
So he bought a little Ford coupe
Uh-huh.
with a rumble seat.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And
Very,
he used to go
very
to those
classy.
hills.
Yes.
Well, all my girlfriends, when I was freshman in college, were pretty
They're pretty interested in him.
interested in him. But anyway, he met the woman he married, and once he met her, he wasn't interested in anybody else.
Yeah. All right.
So,
So now, when you went to college, you thought you might do journalism or something
Yeah.
like that. Now, where did you go to college? Where?
Northwest Missouri State
Now,
Teachers
how far
College.
away was that from
Well,
where
it's
you
about
were?
30 miles.
Okay, so, but you had to
Well,
live at the
okay.
college, or?
Now, all right.
All right.
Where did we get the money? Because we didn't have any money.
Right.
Aunt Gretchen Jennings was a school teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't get married, so she offered any of her nieces or nephews $25 a month to go to college for 2 years, because at that time you could teach school after you went
After you had 2 years of
after
college.
2
yeah.
years of college. So she loaned me $25 a month. Now at that time, the tuition was $18.75 for a quarter, and a room with kitchen privileges was $2 a week.
Okay.
And the books, we didn't have to buy the books. We could check out the books, and as long as we didn't destroy them, we could check them back in. And so the books were given, and we did not have to buy books.
Oh my goodness.
So, and of course the library, we never had to buy any books on the outside either. So I went, and I worked in a dime store and stuff like that. So between $25 a month, that's what
you went to college on.
Yeah.
And it was enough to
and
do
for
it.
2 years, when I graduated, because the third year my father sent me, and the fourth year I had earned enough in the summer to pay my tuition. So when I left, got out of college, I had tuition loans. I had college loans of $400.
Mm-hmm.
I paid them off the first summer I was in Philadelphia.
Oh my goodness. All right. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Now, so did you major? You had mentioned that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So-
yeah. So what did you study in college? Tell me
Yeah,
about
so
your
I started out-
academic career.
Okay, I started out journalism,
Yeah.
and so they had a school newspaper called the Northwest Missourian, and my advisor was a woman named Mattie Dykes, and she also ran the newspaper, was sponsor of the newspaper. Well, she didn't do anything but criticize every story I wrote, and I despised her. So I absolutely thought, God, I can't. Well, furthermore, they didn't have a journalism school, so I would have had to go to the University of Missouri afterward, and I didn't have any money to go there anyway. So I despised her, and so I decided the only reason I hadn't taken math was I didn't know what I could do with it except teach school, and I didn't want to teach school.
Mm-hmm.
So I switched over to math. And so that's how that happened.
Ah, okay. Because you just had such a terrible teacher.
Well, I
Very good,
mean,
yeah.
somebody may have liked her, but
You didn't.
well, I had another interesting situation because my brother Bob was a brown noser, particularly with older people.
Uh-huh.
Older women loved him.
Yeah.
So even when I went to high school, I mean, Miss Madeira was a maiden lady, and she thought he was absolutely wonderful. And when I went to college, those English maiden ladies thought he was wonderful. Even my calculus teacher, you know.
Yeah, okay.
All of them. I was always compared to Bob. Well, Bob was, he was a brown noser. And the question is, nobody in the family ever determined whether or not he did it deliberately or whether he really liked these old people.
Okay.
I mean,
But the effect was the same.
the effects were the same, and so I didn't show up very well in comparison with. And to add to this,
Did you always say what you really thought, even then?
I suppose so.
Okay.
I don't.
All right. But come on.
Anyway, it was kind of interesting. I loved college. I mean, I went when I was 16, and the first time I'd ever been away from home, and I absolutely loved it. And I took a course in biology. So the very first quarter I was in school, I got a pink slip in biology, and I got an honor in phys ed. Now, they didn't have grades at that time. They just had basically pass or
Pass or fail?
honor or fail,
Yep.
etc. So everybody teased me about being brawny but not brainy. Well, what happened was, why did this happen? Because I was salutatorian of my high school graduation. I mean, I was a very bright, considered a very bright kid. In fact, Stanbury said after there was an article in the paper about I was an ENIAC programmer. The school said I made the highest marks in math that had ever been made in a school. So anyway, to get a pink slip,
Yes.
I mean,
Well, you weren't used to that.
my God, I couldn't believe such a thing could happen to me. Well, what happened was my biology teacher, I'm sure he must have read Count Krzyzewski's Science and Sanity. It's a book on semantics. Because Count Krzyzewski said that people went crazy using the Aristotelian logic, and because there were variations of things. And he gave such an example as if you tried to define what a horse was while you were looking at a Shetland pony, you would give a description and you'd see another horse and your description wouldn't fit. So he was convinced that, you know, people had to be very careful about how they define things. So I'm sure this teacher must have read that, because he wouldn't allow a dictionary definition of these words. He would not allow the definition in the book, and he wouldn't allow one from context. And every day he gave us this vocabulary test in biology.
Oh, my goodness.
And I flunked him.
Yeah.
Because I could not figure out what he wanted.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you would put the one from the dictionary, I mean, wrong. I mean, from the book, wrong.
Yeah.
So, and the class was in turmoil. I mean, people arguing with him. But anyway, so this was one of those examples where my mother showed her what kind of a person she is, because I told him I'm really very sorry, but that I'm sure that I would pass the course. And she just wrote back and said, yeah, I'm sure you will too. I mean, you know, she they didn't scold me or anything.
Really?
No.
Okay.
No, she didn't. So anyway, apparently I finally determined how to do it because I began to pass the test, and I did pass the course. I didn't make an honor in it, but anyway, I passed it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I mean, this man was one of my favorite teachers, by the way.
Okay.
It seems hard to believe, but...
All right, yes.
Yeah, well, he also taught us about sex. And you know, a freshman in college being taught about sex. So he said that he put a box outside his office, and we could put any question in there that we wanted to, and he would answer it. So, I mean, some of the questions were pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
But the one that I remember the most is that somebody asked, how about having, before you get married, shouldn't you have sex with the person you're going to marry to see if you're compatible? So, so he said, well, sex is like music. You have to practice to get good at it. and he said one test wouldn't tell you anything. But our mouths were hanging open.
Oh my goodness, oh yes.
How do you like that? Like
I
playing music.
like that one. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, he was one of my favorite. And then I had another favorite teacher named Blanche Dow. She was... I don't know, I suppose most school has them. They called them humanities there. Mm-hmm. And for the first 2 years, you had to take these humanities courses. Well, they were world culture courses is what they really were. Art and music and things of that kind. And so she taught those courses, and she'd been, all over Europe and around, and she spoke French, and I thought she was wonderful. So she was really my role model to some extent, other than my Aunt Gretchen. Aunt Gretchen was my role model also. Because I never intended to get married till I was 40, like Aunt Gretchen, and I wasn't going to have any children. Because I sure didn't want to marry any of those farm
boys.
Those farm boys that have kids hanging on my skirts. So.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just a little bit of about Aunt Gretchen, and why was she one of your other role
Well,
models?
she used to, she used to come home, and in the summer, and it was one of the highlights of the year was when Aunt Gretchen came home, because she wore makeup and she wore handmaker suits, and
oh my goodness!
And she used to talk to us, and she used to correct our English. and I said, and anything else she felt like correcting it. but anyway, we were crazy about Aunt Gretchen.
Where'd she live?
Well, originally she taught outside St. Louis, but then she taught in Cleveland. And how she had enough money to give us that money is beyond me.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because the school teachers didn't make that much money. But eventually, what Aunt Gretchen did was she married an old bachelor. He was an industrial arts teacher when she was 40. Well, they were crazy about each other. Well, anyway, they went to California, and he opened an automobile agency. So he sold Mercuries. Mm-hmm. And I remember one year they went to Detroit and picked up 2 cars, and brand new cars, and they wouldn't have to pay freight because they were going to drive them back to California. So they came to Missouri and would take us out in these brand new cars. Well, I mean, we were poor. I'd never been in a brand new car before.
Oh, that was pretty exciting.
But oh my goodness, and it was interesting because he didn't have any brothers or sisters, so he took us as his nieces and nephews,
Oh, wow. Oh,
the
that's
same
great.
as Aunt Gretchen.
Yes.
So, they were really glamorous people
That's
to me. And then after, what happened was, during the wartime, my Aunt Gretchen worked in a defense plant, if you can believe it, as a riveter, and then he did, and then after the war he built houses, so he became quite wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Because houses were everybody needed houses.
Yeah, needed houses
the
when they
war.
came back after the war.
Yeah.
Wow. And she was a riveter.
Yeah.
That's
I
pretty-
can't imagine Aunt Gretchen as a riveter. Well, anyway, he told this story that when he met her, they went to a country fair, and she told him that she could milk a cow. And he said, "Show me." So she milked a cow at the fair to show him that she could milk.
Oh,
Very
wow.
funny.
All right, that's good. Well, let's get back to your story. So you graduated, did you major in mathematics?
I majored in math. Well, of course, the first year I was a freshman, December 7th, was Pearl Harbor.
Okay, while you were a freshman. Okay.
Well, I was a freshman, so, I was playing bridge one Sunday afternoon, and somebody ran in and said that Japan was bombing Pearl Harbor, so we all went in to listen to the radio about it, and it was really, that spring was really something, because the boys, it cleaned out the boys right away, and even the younger teachers. So it was really a pretty sad campus
Mm-hmm.
the next spring. And then the next year, there weren't very many men, and then the next year they got a Navy program, and it was an officer's training, but it was, I don't know, I think they were V2 and V12. One was for sailors who had been at sea,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one was for new recruits.
Okay.
Well, you can imagine that the sailors that had been at sea, how exciting that was for Missouri, for most people who never even seen the ocean.
Right.
So anyway, I had most of my math courses with the sailors. And
Okay.
of course, I was the only math major, in my class.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
There was a young man that came, I think he was a year behind me, from Peru to the school, and he took calculus and astronomy and things like that with me, but I took analytic geometry, trigonometry, and physics and stuff like that with the sailors.
Okay.
And I was the only woman, of course, and the only civilian. Well, all of them knew me, of course.
Yes, of course.
But I didn't know them.
You stood out.
So anyway, when I was in physics in the lab course, I had umpteen sailors wanted to be my lab partner. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very popular.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Now, what did you decide, or when did you start thinking about what you were going to do when you graduated from college?
Well, a year before my senior year, I worked at a defense plant in Kansas City for Pratt Whitney. I did silver plating on a little gear that fits behind the propeller.
Okay.
And so I had just figured it out myself that I only needed one more semester, because we went on the semester system when the sailors came. Went from the quarter system to the semester system. So I figured I only need one semester to graduate. But when I went back, the dean told me I couldn't graduate because I was taking too many courses, and he said, furthermore, the math courses you need aren't even being given. So I was really horrified. So I ran up to my sponsor, my advisors,
Yes.
and I was crying. And actually, this teacher Horsfall was sitting in this office with him, and my advisor. And so he said, my advisor, his name was Dr. Hake. He said, I happen to be head of the math department, and we can hardly say that we provide math graduates if we don't even give them the courses that they need to graduate. So he said, since you're the only one that needs them, we'll just arrange them for your convenience.
Oh,
so
my
he
goodness.
did.
So he did.
Well, he used two old teachers. I mean, one of them was old enough, had taught my father, and the other one was past retirement age. But anyway, so I taught modern geometry and theory of equations with theory of numbers with those two.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, I graduated, and I was finished with my coursework in January of 1945. So my calculus teacher, I had said to my calculus teacher, I don't want to teach school, but I can't think of anything else to do. And she said, oh, there are lots of things you can do. So she began to bring me recruitment letters.
Ah, okay.
So she brought me from one from IBM for system service girls, and she brought me one from Aberdeen Proving Ground for computers.
Okay.
And so she said, go to the University of Pennsylvania. They have a differential analyzer. She had come from the Dayton, Ohio Air Force Base,
Okay.
and they had a differential analyzer. So she said, there are only 3 in the world, and there's one at the Moore School of the University of Pennsylvania. And, well, she was wrong, there were 2 more, but she said there was only 3, one at the Air Force Base, one at Penn,
Yep.
and one at MIT, where
Yes.
Vannevar Bush had invented it.
Right.
So, but actually Aberdeen had one,
Okay.
and Dr. Douglas Hartree had built one out of mechanical parts, which they actually used during World War II
Mm-hmm.
to do calculations. So anyway, she said, go there. So anyway, I applied, and I didn't hear from him. So I was at home, and my father would come in every day with telling me about another school that needed a math teacher, and because they were crying for math teachers,
Yes.
because most of the math majors were men, and most of them were in the military.
Right.
So they were really hurting for them. So people were always telling him, and he was always finding out about them, and he'd come home and say, oh, you can have this math job here, there, the other where. And I'd say, no, I'm waiting. And my sister tried to get me to go into business with her to open a dry cleaning establishment in Stanbury. Well, I wasn't interested in business. So it didn't come. Finally, when it came, now I had gotten out in January, so this was March, so you can imagine how
my
much
goodness.
pressure
Yes,
I was
exactly.
on to get a job. But anyway, it came, and it was a telegram, and they just sent it to my sister. It's pretty casual there. They knew my sister, was my sister, so they gave the telegram to her, and it said that I was hired and to come as soon as possible.
Oh, my goodness. Just like that.
Yeah, I was on the Wabash out of Stanbury the next night.
So you had just, so you finally got this telegram after sending in your application,
Yeah.
telling them what's your background. Do you remember what you put in your application to convince them to just send you
Well,
a telegram and hire
no.
you without
Oh,
even going there to
No, I think
interview?
it was the fact that they were looking for women math majors, and they were recruiting all around the country because they were even taking people that just had some math, because there were 5 of us that came about the same time. There were 4 that came about a month before I did, and 2 were from Kansas, 1 was from Ohio, and 1 was from Wisconsin. Now, they did not have their degrees in math. So I think it was just the fact that I had a degree in math.
Okay.
And
yeah,
period.
which was unusual at that time.
Well, and they were recruiting, and they had a hard time finding them. And so why, I mean, the government, well, I don't know why it took so long, but, you know, government process probably.
Yes. Okay. So you got the telegram?
So I got to Philadelphia. Well, of course, I'd lived in Kansas City the year before, but I mean, I'd never been a place like that. And I didn't even know when I came there, the first station I came to, which is North Philadelphia, I didn't know that the biggest station was 30th Street. So I just got off and got in a taxi and went to the Y, you know, the Y to stay.
Yes.
Because it was hard to find a place to stay. So then I got a cab and went out to the site, which was out at the Moore School.
Right.
And they were so surprised to see me so fast.
They said, come right away, and you took them literally.
So they said, well, we needed you to have a physical. So they sent me over to this doctor. And so it was on like a Friday afternoon. So all of a sudden he jumped up and said, I don't have time to finish this. I'll see you Monday. So I said, okay. So he called me at the Y on Sunday and said if I would come out to his house that he would finish the physical. Well, I was naive, but I wasn't that naive. So I said, no, thank you. I would see you on Monday. Well, anyway, when I told them at the office what an old lecture they had for a doctor, they never used him again.
Oh, okay.
But isn't it amazing?
That's amazing.
I mean, you just arrive in town and somebody's already trying to do.
Yes.
That's
Pretty amazing, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly people perceive that you're naive and assume you're really naive.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So-
try to take advantage of
Yeah,
your
well,
naivety.
anyway, so there was no place to live. So my sister, husband, was in the Navy, and she was at Newport News, and because he was in port, and he, you know, had shipped out. So she came by Philadelphia and stayed and said, I'm not leaving until we find you someplace to live.
Oh, well, that was nice,
So-
yeah.
Well, hardly. So we followed the ads, and I mean, we would see these places and these row houses. I mean, Philadelphia is a city of homes, but it's mainly row houses. So we thought they were slums. So,
Okay.
and so my sister said, oh, come home. Don't stay here. This is just a city of slums. So finally I went to the University of Pennsylvania Housing, and they got a room for me at a place on Spruce Street that had students from the Curtis Institute of Music. I don't know if you've
Oh,
ever heard
yes,
of it.
of course I know.
It's the finest, probably the finest music school
Yes.
in the country, and technology students. So then my sister took off and went back to Missouri, and that's how it began. But I was, I mean, I never had such a wonderful time in my life because these students, these music students, were the finest musicians in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they were interested in me because I wasn't a musician, surprisingly enough.
Okay.
Because they could talk to me because they knew I wasn't going to gossip about them. Well, it's true. I mean,
Yes.
they could say anything they liked, and so because mainly they were around musicians, so they used to take me to the Academy of Music because their teachers usually had boxes, and they would give tickets to their students, and these students
wonderful.
would take me with them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, yeah, and then the other 4 girls that had come the same time I did, more or less, we were all interested in seeing Philadelphia. So we worked 6 days a week, but we had Sunday off. So we used to run around Philadelphia on Sunday, seeing Philadelphia.
And so you got to know
Oh, yeah, so
your
I had
coworkers. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I had a grand time with them.
That's great.
Yeah.
So now, what did they do when you arrived? What was the first thing they had you do or did with you?
Well, the first thing they had me do was to sit down, and they began to show me how to do a trajectory, and they also had a little training course. You would go like for a couple of hours. Adele Goldstine taught it.
Who did?
Adele Goldstine.
Okay.
And it would teach you computing techniques for doing these trajectories, like inverse interpolation and things like that. And she would, tell you a little bit about the equations and things like that. So then, but other than that, and then that was only for about 2 weeks. And then you just sat down and did a trajectory.
Okay.
So by hand, I used a Monroe calculator.
Okay.
And so that's what I did.
Oh, all right.
And then I'd only been there for a couple months, but anyway, I looked around and I saw, my goodness, these people had been there for several years. And I saw that I was low man on the totem pole. Well, Dr. Haig...
You were just the new recruits, raw fodder.
Well, my advisor had told me not to come to Philadelphia because he said, you'll just be one of many. And, like a nobody. He said, if you teach school, you'll be a respected member of the community and all that kind of stuff. So... I wasn't interested, but when I got there and I was sitting there, I was thinking, Dr. Haig's about right, because I was just sitting there calculating these trajectories. So,
and lots of other people doing the same thing.
Oh yeah, they had about 80 people at that same place.
Okay.
Everybody.
We're sitting there calculating.
Yeah, well, these trajectories were to go into firing tables.
Yes, right.
For guns, and each firing table had about 1,000 trajectories, 1,000 to 1,200, and it took about 40 hours, 30 to 40 hours to do one by hand.
Oh wow!
So they had a lot of them to do. Now the differential analyzer also did the trajectories, and it took the differential analyzer about 20 minutes to do one, and it took, for each new gun, it took about 2 days, 2 to 3 days to set up the differential analyzer to do it. But
for a particular gun, but then it could turn them out relatively fast.
But the thing was that the trajectories done by the differential analyzer were not as accurate as they were done by hand.
Oh.
So what they would do would be to intersperse the hand-calculated ones with the differential analyzer and would smooth, smooth the results.
Oh my goodness! Okay.
So that they did not do by hand, all 1,200 of those trajectories. They did some of them interspersed with the one from the differential analyzer.
All right.
So, in any case, I was looking around and thinking of...
You know, you've just been added to this giant pool
That's right.
of people working on
That's
these
right.
trajectories.
Yeah,
You and the people that
right.
arrived the same day, the same
Right.
week. And
Right.
the girls arrived the same
Yeah.
week, yeah, and you're saying,
So-
oh, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life?
So then this announcement came around. I'd only been there about 2 months, I guess. Yeah, it was June when the announcement came around. So I had arrived, I believe it was March 30th. So
Yep.
I'd been there April and May. So this announcement came around that they were looking for operators of a new machine they were building called the ENIAC. So, of course, I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
But I knew it wasn't doing hand calculations.
You knew what it wasn't.
So I figured that if I could start on the ground floor with other people, then I'd have a chance to get ahead.
Yes.
So I applied, and I believe there were 13 of us that applied, and they claimed they wanted 5 women.
Yes.
Well, or 5.
There were 5 places to
Yeah, 5 places, because there were a couple of men that did apply. And I didn't know this, but they'd already picked 4. So they really were only looking for 1.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So anyway, I was not picked.
Okay.
I was the second alternate. So I thought, well, that's that. And then on a Friday afternoon, Lieutenant Tornheim, my manager, called me in and said, could I be ready to go to Aberdeen on Monday? That I had been picked as one of the ENIAC operators.
Oh, my goodness.
So I said, you bet. Well, what happened? Well, we were going to Aberdeen because...
No, the ENIAC was not in Aberdeen
No,
yet. Yeah,
no.
it hadn't been moved.
No.
Right.
But the ENIAC used a card reader for input, a card punch for output, and a tabulator as a printer. And then we had a sorter and a key punch and a verifier and things like that. So they wanted to send us to Aberdeen to learn key punch equipment so we could wire up the boards for the different problems on these punch card equipment.
Okay.
So Aberdeen was about 32,000 acres of swamp, and it was the town itself was a little wide place in the road, and there were 20,000 soldiers there at that time, and it was pretty much a hellhole. So the one that was picked, the first one that was picked, had a very nice apartment in West Philadelphia, and housing, was very bad. And when you went to Aberdeen, the single people basically lived in barracks. So she didn't want to give up her apartment, a nice apartment, to go to Aberdeen, so she turned them down. And and the first alternate was actually from Missouri, from Park College. And people, during the war, people didn't take vacations. So, once in a while they got a vacation. Well, it turned out she was on vacation. So they called her up and told her she'd have to cut short her vacation to go to Aberdeen. Well, she decided she didn't want to do that, so she turned him down. So luck beats brains.
Yes.
So that's how I got to be an ENIAC programmer.
And you said, we're told on Friday, can you be there Monday? And you said yes.
I said yes, you better believe it. Well, it was very surprising because none of the other women had ever seen me before, because I hadn't been there very long. And Kay worked on the differential analyzer, Kay McNulty, who was one of them, and Betty Snyder worked on another floor, as did Marlon and Ruth. So they'd never even seen me.
Okay.
So
They'd worked in teams, though, doing the trajectory calculations, but
they'd been there for a long
area.
time. And yeah, so they were standing on the platform of the B&O Railroad, you know, wondering who this person was that was coming. And so when they met me, they were absolutely wonderful. I mean, none of them had ever seen somebody from the farm, and I had never been anywhere or done anything.
Yeah.
So they were just wonderful.
That was great.
Yeah.
Very good. So they really welcomed you.
Oh, yeah. Well, but Betty and I became best friends, and of course, Kay McNulty, Mauchly, Antonelli, she and I were friends for 61 years.
My goodness.
She just died a year ago, April.
Okay.
And, I mean, they were wonderful. We were crazy about each other. Well, first of all, there were 2 Jews, one Catholic, one Quaker, and I was a member of the Church of Christ. And so none of us had ever been around people of other religions like that.
Yes.
So we spent a lot of time talking about religion as well as about the ENIAC.
Okay.
And, of course, they took me to Baltimore so I could eat lobster, and Ruth took me to New York, and Marlon took me to Washington
Oh, my
because I hadn't
goodness.
seen these places. So
Okay.
I really had a wonderful time with them.
Okay. So how long did you stay in Aberdeen?
Well, we stayed in
Doing this
Aberdeen
training.
from June till we came back at the end of July. And this is the interesting thing. Herman Goldstine supposedly was in charge of everything. We didn't even have a place to sit. We didn't have a place to sit.
When you came back, you
When
mean?
we came back. And we had nobody to teach us anything. They just gave us these block diagrams of the ENIAC and told us to study them, to learn how it works. Well, we couldn't see the ENIAC because it was a secret clearance, and our clearance, I mean, all of us had a clearance of some kind, but it wasn't secret. It wasn't
You
that
didn't
high.
need to have secret to do trajectories.
No. Well, I'd worked at a defense plant too, and then
And you
they
had a clearance from
yeah,
that.
well, they had a security, but it was much lower. So they said we couldn't see the ENIAC until our security clearance came through. So Betty Snyder,
Yeah.
Holborn, we just picked a classroom because it was August and the school wasn't in session. I mean, so the classroom was empty. So we just sat there with this block diagram, and we didn't even know how to read it. I mean,
Yeah, you didn't
just-
know what it meant. Yeah.
So we were sitting there looking at this thing, and they were putting a 3rd floor on the Moore School at that time. So the jackhammers were going, and the dust was flying, and it was hot. I mean,
No air conditioning.
oh no, I mean, modern pen is not. I mean, it's old.
Yep.
But anyway, so we were sitting there trying to figure this out, and this man came in the room, and he walked all around the room looking at the ceiling. And then he came over and he said, "Hi, my name is John Mauchly." He said, "I was just checking to see if the ceiling's falling in." So,
Oh my goodness.
so
Okay.
we almost fell off our chairs.
Because you knew who he was.
Oh
yeah.
my goodness, we'd never even met him, and
Oh my
neither
goodness.
one of us. And we said, "Boy, are we glad to see you. Tell us how this blasted accumulator works."
Yeah.
Well, anyway, he's a marvelous teacher.
Okay.
Absolutely a wonderful teacher. And so he was explaining it to us, and so he said, "Well, my office is next door. So anytime I'm in my office, you can come in and ask me questions." So we began to, in the afternoon, he'd be in his office, so we would go in and save up our questions, and then we'd go in and ask a question. So that's how we learned about the ENIAC.
Oh my goodness. right from John Mauchly. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, you get clear answers, don't you? Especially if he's a good teacher,
Well,
he can explain things.
Yeah, well, John's, he's a great teacher in the sense that he always pushes you, you know,
Yes. Yeah.
to do more than,
Okay.
you know, if
Do
you
more,
ask him a
learn more.
question,
Yeah.
you know, he'll give you an answer that takes you beyond where you are.
Yeah. Not just
Not
the
just
literal,
no,
straight,
he
simple
just- yeah,
answer.
right.
He'll then
Right.
really explain more about it, so you
Yeah.
understand it even
Yeah.
better. Okay.
So then in September, when the boys were coming back for classes,
Yeah.
they gave us an office.
Ah.
And so the ENIAC women then got together for the first time. And we would, you know, we were sitting there trying to figure out how to program the ENIAC. Now, actually, you know, I don't think they ever really thought that we would be programmers. I think the original view of it was that anybody that had a problem to put on the ENIAC, that they would program it themselves and then just give it to us and we would plug up the machine and run it.
Ah, you do the wiring. You put in
yeah.
all the plugs and set all the switches and everything.
Right. I don't think they ever expected, but the thing that happened was, of course, that it was so complex from the very beginning that you know, that our role switched so that we really were programmers.
Yeah.
And
It was easier for you to understand the math or the equations that somebody wanted to have solved and the math problem, and then translate it then for what was
Yeah.
essentially a mathematician
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
learn how
to
tell
well,
you how all the settings and what should be
Yeah.
connected to what.
Right,
Yeah.
because I mean the ENIAC was a parallel machine.
Right.
And plus, I mean, it had multiple memory buses, and instead of having a memory bus, you know, like modern machines would have, or instead of having a program counter, I mean, it had program trays which you plugged in and out of to
Yeah.
stimulate the next operation.
Right.
And then, of course, you had whatever the operation was you were doing. Instead of doing in software, you had to set the switches and round-offs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And anyway, I remember we were sitting there trying to figure out how the ENIAC could do a trajectory, because we realized that the real test for the ENIAC's acceptance would be the fact that it could calculate a trajectory. So we began to figure out how to do it, and so we were saying, my goodness, there's not enough equipment to do a trajectory. And finally, I remember one day Kay said, "Oh, I know. We can use a master programmer to repeat code." And lo and behold, we did. We began to think about, you know, how we could have subroutines and nested subroutines and all that
Oh
stuff.
my goodness! All right.
And that was so exciting to realize how we could do that. And I find this interesting because Press Eckert says that, said in a speech, well, he gave the first with the ENIAC speech, and he gave the first, the thing that were first on the ENIAC. And so that's one of the things that he says was his subroutines and nesting subroutines, that if they had not had subroutines and nested subroutines, and I understand that the Aiken Mark I did not have them, that it would have required 1 million vacuum tubes instead of 18,000
Wow. Okay.
to build a machine that big.
Yes.
So
that could do that's problem. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's, I mean, Mauchly thought of the ENIAC as he had used desk calculators to do calculation for years, and he thought of the ENIAC as a series of desk calculators that were under master control.
Ah, okay.
So, I mean, that was the way he thought of it. And he did not think of it just as a trajectory solver.
Mm-hmm.
He thought of it as a general purpose computer, and he used to always try to get us to think, you know, of other problems rather than just the trajectory. He would always want us to invert a matrix
Mm-hmm.
or something like that.
Yes, okay.
So, but anyway, our job was to get the trajectory done.
Okay.
So then
So all of you were sort of working on the
all
same
of us
thing?
were
Yeah.
working, but the one thing that we did do that was very smart, and this is the thing that got us respect from the engineers.
Yes.
We had Ruth and Marlin. Now Marlin was supposed to be one of the human computers that never made a mistake. So anyway, she had also worked with John Mauchly before she went over and worked with the Aberdeen. So anyway, Ruth and Marlin were friends and had worked in the same group, so they were assigned the job of doing a trajectory exactly the same way the ENIAC did it, add time by add time. And
Okay.
it was that trajectory that when we got on the machine that allowed us to debug it down to the vacuum tube. And we could do it in a very few minutes. But anyway,
So they had on paper the steps that the
Yeah, it
machine
took forever
that you
to
would
do.
go through if you did it exactly the
and
way
it would
the
show
ENIAC,
what was in it.
what was in all the accumulators.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Ah, okay.
So
Yeah, so you just go run the same problem with the same inputs, and you see where it doesn't agree.
Well, and if we made an error, we could hone into it by powers of 2, because we could set breakpoints, you know, half the way and see if the error was in the beginning or at
okay.
the end.
Yeah.
And then we'd have that and see.
Yep.
You know, and
binary
so we'd
search
go in.
right through.
Right, we'd go in. So we could find an error in a very few minutes, and the engineers were very impressed with that because the engineers had little test programs for their unit, like the Bob Shaw had one for the function table, and Kite Sharpless had one for the, I believe it was the multiplier, and Chuan Chu had one for the divider, square rooter, and stuff like that.
Yes, okay.
So, but they didn't have anything for the whole machine.
Yeah.
So this trajectory, though, tested the whole machine.
Very good.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the next thing that happened from the timeline, I've gotten Stan Frankel and Nick Metropolis came to put the Los Alamos problem on the ENIAC. Now, Johnny von Neumann.
Yeah, I read that that was the first big problem
That's right.
that actually was ever
Yeah.
run on it. Was
Yeah.
not 100 or 200 or 1,000 trajectories, but was this problem.
It was their problem. Now, what happened was that Johnny von Neumann was a consultant with Aberdeen, and he was also a consultant with Los Alamos.
Mm-hmm.
So he convinced Penn and Aberdeen that they should run this Los Alamos problem as a test to see if the ENIAC really worked.
Mm-hmm.
So these two, Nick Metropolis and Stan Frankel, ran the punch card installation at Los Alamos. So they came, I think they came in the summer while we were in Aberdeen,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't see them then. And then they went back to Los Alamos because there was a Trinity test, you know, the atom bomb test
Yes,
at
right.
Alamogordo.
Yeah.
So anyway, they came in October,
Mm-hmm.
And when they came, they had already programmed their problem. But
They didn't need you, or, well,
well, they did to run it and to set it up and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
in
but
any
they
case-
had done all the, they had done
They
their,
had done-
they had
they had-
learned enough
yes.
about the ENIAC to
Well, they
program it
came. They got the block diagrams too, and
figured it out.
and they had come and talked to President John and the engineers. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so anyway, they came and so the day that first time we saw the ENIAC was the day that we put the Los Alamos
Oh my
problem
goodness.
on the machine.
Oh wow, all right.
So, because we'd never met the engineers.
You weren't allowed in there.
No. So, anyway, we went down and we were assigned a unit, like one of us would be assigned accumulator 1, accumulator 2, etc.
Yes, yeah.
around, and then Goldstine stood out with her plan, and he would say, accumulator 1, set it to receive from alpha, memory bus alpha, and a program pulse input would be A1, let's say.
Yes, okay, yeah.
So you would do it.
Yeah, okay, right.
Then he'd tell,
The next one.
the
Yeah.
next one. So anyway, that's how we put that problem on. So then during this time, Fran and Kay were really assigned to help them run their program and stuff, which they did. And Marlon and Ruth were still doing this trajectory, and then Betty and I were assigned to do the trajectory, for the acceptance test. So
Okay.
so that's how we worked in these teams.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think I mentioned, but when we came back to Philadelphia, a sixth programmer was added, and that was Fran Belis, and she had been worked on the differential analyzer also. So they had added a sixth programmer.
Okay.
So anyway, that's
Well, did it help to have worked on the differential analyzer? At least what I read an article by Arthur Burks that, sort of showed that there were a lot of similarities in the sense of the layout of multiple units that were connected up, the way the differential analyzer was connected up and sort of did a problem in parallel. Did it help the people who had worked on that? Did they find it easier to figure this
I
out,
think
or
so.
not really?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
not at all.
Not at all. All right. Good.
I mean, the ENIAC was so different.
Yeah.
Not at all.
It was just completely different.
I mean,
Okay.
the thing about it was that all of us knew the trajectory problem,
Yes.
which was a big help.
Right. You all understood
So that we knew, so that what we really had to learn was the ENIAC. We didn't have to learn the trajectory problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You didn't have to learn the math.
No.
You just had to learn how to
Yeah.
convert the math
Yeah.
to set up the machine.
So all of
All
us,
right.
all of us helped Dick and Stan some. I think the way that they worked with their problem was that Nick would take one shift and they ran two shifts, and Stan would take the other one, and then Kay would work with one and Fran would work with the other.
Okay. All right.
But then we helped them also
Mhm.
every once in a while.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, they were really quite ingratiating, and it was interesting because Stan's wife was with him, and of course by this time the atom bomb had been dropped, and everybody was very much interested, in the atom bomb. So we were asking her about all this stuff, and from what she said, the people at Los Alamos were as horrified as everybody else in the world with the number of people that got killed at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean,
Yeah.
that they were,
They didn't realize what.
well, they,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little different when you think about something and then when it really happens,
Exactly.
the horror of the reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
Anyway,
All right. Well, so you worked on the acceptance test problem, and some of the others worked on this first big problem from Los Alamos. Then, so what happens next?
well, they were going to have a public announcement of the ENIAC. Well, they had one on February the 1st for the press,
Mm-hmm.
but the press was not allowed to write about it until they had the announcement to the scientific community and the university community of the government
Mm-hmm.
on the 15th. Well, as I understand it, now the ENIAC women had nothing to do with the first, but I understand from people who were there that it was very unimpressive. And so Goldstine invited Betty and me out to his and his wife, I mean Adele was there, to his apartment, and he asked us if the trajectory was ready to go, and if they could use it as a demonstration for the announcement on the 15th.
Okay.
Well, Betty and I were pretty sure it was perfect. So, so we said, you bet.
Good.
So he said, okay, you can do it. So we went back and began working like mad to put it on and to, get it up and running.
Uh-huh.
So we worked, and everything was going fine until the night before. Well, actually, everybody was really frightened because they realized, and that was one of the problems with the first, they realized how foolish they would look to announce this machine
Yes.
that had been bought to do trajectories and it couldn't even do one.
Right.
That would have been pretty horrible. So
Right.
I think that's why the one on the first, because they just had sines and cosines and a few things like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dean Pender of the Moore School came down. Betty and I were working away, and so he asked us how things were going. And I mean, Dean Pender never talked to us at all, so we knew how important this was. So he said, he asked us how we were going. We said fine. So he said, hop to it. So he left us a fifth of liquor.
Oh my goodness.
Well, he kind of liked to drink his lunch, so. But Betty and I didn't drink, fortunately. I mean, maybe we'd have a Tom Collins once in a while, but we didn't really drink. So, of course, we never drank it. We never drank it.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow. All right.
So anyway, the night before the demonstration, the night of the 14th, Valentine's Day, it worked. Everything was fine, except it didn't stop when it hit the ground. It dug a hole. Kept on going. So, geez, we were worried and what to do about it. So, Betty, the last train to Narberth was like 12:30 or something.
That's
so,
where she lived. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to leave, so we left, and we just thought, well, that's what we'll have to do. We'll just have to run it. So anyway, I always say Betty had her nighttime logic working. She was an amazing person. Frequently, when we would have a problem,
Mm-hmm.
she would come in the next day and say, I was thinking this morning this way. And I thought, what on earth is she doing? is she going home and working all night? Because she came up with a solution to problems so many times
Yeah.
the next day. Well, it turned out she didn't work all night, but her brain did. That,
Okay. Yes.
that what she did was before she went to bed, she would, she'd be thinking about the problems and apparently her brain worked through the night. And the next morning she would come up with the answer. Well, anyway, her nighttime, I called it her nighttime logic, and I've always said Betty could do more logic in her sleep than most people could when they're awake.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next morning she came in, and she knew which switch on the master programmer was set wrong, and she flipped it, and we were in business.
Oh my
It
goodness.
stopped when it hit the ground.
Oh wow.
So, in any case, now the ENIAC has 20 accumulators, and the top of them is a 10 by 10 matrix that stores a 10 decimal digit number, and on the side it has 2 for the sign.
Okay.
So the vacuum tubes that do the calculations, they had the tips of those vacuum tubes peeking through little holes they drilled in the chassis,
Yeah.
in the front of the chassis. So when the ENIAC ran, you could see the numbers build up and see the signs change and all this kind of stuff.
Oh wow.
Well, the accumulator had this 10 by 10 matrix with the vacuum tubes that do the calculations with the tips of them peeking through holes drilled in the chassis in front of it. And these you could see, but when the photographers took the pictures, they didn't show up very well. So Press and John went out and they got tubes, light tubes that screwed in the front of the chassis in front of the tip of the vacuum tube. So it looked like a half a ping pong ball, and they printed the number on them.
Oh my goodness.
So now when it ran, it really produced quite a show.
Okay.
Because these things really showed up. So when they ran the trajectory for the demonstration, the trajectory that they ran took 30 seconds
Okay.
for the shell to trace it, but the ENIAC did the calculations in 20 seconds. So it actually ran faster. Well, and of course the people that were sitting there could see the numbers build up as the shell reached the altitude and then came down and hit the ground. So that was pretty impressive.
Wow.
And then what we did was we printed it out, and then we went out to the tabulator and printed them up and handed them out as souvenirs for people. So,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, we ran it several times, to show people, exactly what was going on.
Oh.
So, I mean, they were absolutely ecstatic. I mean,
Yeah. So
absolutely
that
astounding.
demonstration, it really,
Yeah.
it yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I wonder whether we'll ever get a one of those souvenir printouts in the museum. Wouldn't that be
that's
wonderful?
really, I should be ashamed of myself because I never kept stuff like that. It's
Of course,
interesting.
why would you? I mean, you're a youngster at this time.
Yeah, I didn't.
You aren't thinking about that. See what this is all going to mean some 50 years or 70 years later.
Well, we knew it was an important thing,
yeah,
that
yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
But I've never been a person that collects things very much.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So,
Well, the thing that happened, though,
yeah. So what happened? Okay.
well, they went out for dinner with all the people, but guess what? Not the ENIAC women. Betty and I weren't invited.
Oh my goodness.
So we were sort of horrified
Yeah.
that we knew how important it was, and we felt that we had done so much, but we didn't. And of course, in history afterward, nobody ever mentions us. And of course, Goldstine in his book Lies.
Really?
He's a liar.
Yeah.
He said that he and Adele programmed the trajectory for the demonstration.
Oh.
And he actually says, and he has, he not only did that, but he forged entries into the logbook. Because he claims in his book that he wrote in the logbook after it was ready to go, you know,
Yeah.
okay or some such,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
He wasn't even there.
Oh.
So, well, he lied. I mean, he never even mentioned in his book, The ENIAC Women, all he ever mentioned was our names and who we married, and he called me Elizabeth. Well, I've never,
Oh my
my
goodness.
name was never Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I grew up in
Nobody
the Middle
ever
West.
called you Elizabeth.
Well,
right?
I grew up in the Middle West where we used double names, Mary Lee, Betty Jean,
Yes.
Sue Ann, and stuff like that. That's all he told about us. He claimed that he and Adele programmed it. Can you believe that? I mean, that was a bold-faced lie.
Yeah. Wow. That's
And to
terrible.
forge the logbook,
Yeah.
and to think that he is considered a historian.
Yeah.
I mean, he told lots of other lies, which I will tell if you give me a chance.
Okay. All right.
When we come to the things that he lied about.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, so what happens next? Okay. Now.
Well, after this demonstration, of course, they began to. Well, I did with Adele the Taub problem, and then Douglas Hartree came, and Kay and Douglas worked on a problem for him, and then they put the Los Alamos problem back on again, and that ran. And other people came from Los Alamos to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, by the time of the end of that summer of 1946, actually, the Taub problem ran, and I think that was the last program that ran before they moved it to Aberdeen. They were going to move the machine to Aberdeen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting married, so I wasn't going to Aberdeen.
Oh yeah. So now, you tell me now. So when did you meet?
Well, he was an engineer at the Moore School.
Okay. So you met an engineer.
And yeah, and so, well, Marlon then, she'd married a dentist, and she left group. And then when they were moving to Aberdeen, Fran and Ruth and Kay and Betty all went to Aberdeen with it.
Okay.
But anyway, I was getting married, so I wasn't going. Well, Dick Clippinger was at the wind tunnel in Aberdeen, and he had problems he wanted to put on the ENIAC, but they were too big for to run on the ENIAC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how he heard of it, but anyway, he heard that you could use the ENIAC in a different way than it was, and Press and John have it in the patent that you can. Now, once the trajectory wasn't done anymore, we didn't need those function tables, because those function tables stored the drag on the shell.
Yes. Okay.
So once we weren't doing trajectory, we didn't need the function tables. Now, these function tables could store, each one could store 102 12 decimal digit numbers. So anyway, he got the idea from somewhere that you could use the function tables to store a program. So at this time, people were talking about instruction sets, for computers, and a lot of people were planning,
a lot of people were planning to build follow-on, new machines.
Right, and a lot of people were talking about instruction sets and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the EDVAC instruction sets and things of a stored program computer. So the Cleppinger had thought of a 3-address instruction. But anyway, he talked to von Neumann, and von Neumann said no, to use a 1-address instruction. So anyway, Cleppinger couldn't get a programmer to work on his stuff because the Ballistics Research Lab were, busy with their own stuff. So I was a loose programmer.
And you knew the machine.
Yeah, so he wanted me to teach him how to program the ENIAC.
Yeah.
So before I stayed on with Aberdeen, and I used to go down and teach him how to program the ENIAC, and then I would come back and work on how to use a stored program. So anyway, what he decided to do was to write a contract for with the Moore School with me to head it up and to hire 4 programmers that I would train that could do his problems.
Oh, okay.
So that's what he did. So then then the first 3 problems were to be this implementing this stored program. And when we went to Princeton, we would go to Princeton to consult with Johnny von Neumann. Now, what we were consulting with was on the instruction set.
Okay.
And the instruction set was okay, except the problem was we didn't have enough facilities to do them all.
Okay.
So what we would do is we would go up and tell him that that we were having trouble with this one, and we would talk about how to simplify it and things like that. Well, it was interesting because when Dick and he had 2 mathematicians who were going to be defining problems to be solved on the ENIAC. They used to go with us. Their name is Galbraith and Giese, John Giese.
Okay.
And they would go with us, but they were primarily going just to learn how to, to use the ENIAC. So, right. But when we went up there, Adele Goldstine joined the group.
Oh, okay.
And I asked Dick Cleppinger, many years later, if he had hired her, and he said no, and I said, well, I didn't. So who did she work for? So he said he didn't know, but he assumed that it was Los Alamos or Princeton.
Right.
So anyway, we would sit with Adele, and we would program, and then we would meet with von Neumann maybe half an hour a day and discuss what was going on. So we'd stay up there for 2 or 3 days. And then eventually, of course...
And then come back to Philadelphia,
Yeah. And then that was called the 60-order code.
Oh, okay.
60-order code. And then after that, then what we did was a group that I set up in Philadelphia then began to program his problems using this 60-order code.
And the 60-order code was implemented using these function tables.
Right, and then you never had to set up the machine again. All you had to do was to set the switches in the function tables.
Yes, okay.
So the horrendous problem of programming the ENIAC gone.
Okay.
And so the ENIAC was really the first stored program computer,
Okay.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah. After you figured out how to use it that
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
then it did that.
Yeah, well,
Very
that's
good.
another thing. Goldstine says in his book that von Neumann and Adele programmed it. Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting?
They were the
Oh.
ones that did the 60-order code. I mean, he knew better because he went with us when we went in to see von Neumann.
Yes.
He knew
Yeah.
exactly.
Wow.
So,
And he moved up to Princeton to work on the IAS machine, right? He didn't
Yeah.
stay at war school, right?
yeah, well, when I was doing the Taub problem, he was already up there, and he used to come down and have dinner with us. And he used to tell me that the computer business was no longer with Eckert and Mauchly, that it was with the Institute for Advanced Study, that the stuff was there. Well, heck, von Neumann got all his stuff from President John from the EDVAC because he did not invent the stored program computer.
Yeah.
And in fact, this business with the EDVAC, I mean, to say that everybody knew they had IOs and and different things to do.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing he did was to write it down. And the thing that I just found recently, which I find very interesting, because Goldstine in all those years has said that he was responsible for publishing the EDVAC report.
Oh, that
And
preliminary report that
Yeah,
von Neumann wrote.
Yeah, and that he would say, well, probably if von Neumann knew it was going to be published, he would have given credit to somebody. He didn't give credit to anybody, when it. So I just read an affidavit that was in one of the technology magazines that von Neumann signed that said that Goldstine asked him to write the report for publications.
Oh my goodness.
Was when they got permission from Aberdeen and Penn.
Right.
Well, and he knew from the very beginning it was going to be published.
Yeah.
So the fact that he didn't attribute, I mean, it shows to me that he was planning to steal it to start with. I mean, that is piracy.
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't know why Goldstine never knew that, because back in 1984, he was still arguing in the MIT oral history that it was his responsibility, and that von Neumann was so gracious that even if somebody were in the room when he was writing, he would give them credit. I mean, that's baloney. And I mean,
Okay.
it's outrageous that computer history takes that man seriously. He's a liar.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think some people just, they make up things to make themselves.
Yes, but
Seems
this
like-
is history.
I know.
Well, and what gets me, by the way, and this is the one that I am really incensed about, when Goldstine wrote his book, Princeton Press, they have readers, and normally they don't tell the author who the readers are. So John Mauchly, they sent him a copy, and he made the changes and sent it back. And they called him up and told him that they couldn't, they had to tell Goldstine who the reader was because the changes were so extensive. So they told Goldstine, and he made none of them. And they printed it.
Oh my goodness.
So it's not just Goldstine. Princeton Press
Wow.
is, I mean, and the mistakes, the thing that he talked about were the were computer things and not about the ENIAC women. I mean, he of course wouldn't have made any of those changes.
Yeah,
So
right.
I mean, it was just not. He said to me, I mean, John Mauchly said this to me once. He said, "Well, about 95% of what Goldstine said in this chapters that he reviewed were accurate," but he said, "But that other 5% made all the difference."
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Wow. That's not right.
Well, and of course von Neumann called, instead of electrical circuits, he called them neurons, and apparently so it would get by the sensors, because it was a classified project and Press and John couldn't publish. And when Goldstine got this EDVAC report, he told Reed Warren, who was now the head of the project, because they'd kicked Brainerd out. He told Reed Warren that it was just for internal use to train the engineers. So you have a lot of, well, I don't know, I mean, I should think he would be prosecuted for doing stuff like that.
A lot of people playing a lot of games. Sounds
Not
like
games.
to me.
That is intellectual dishonesty. And
Yes.
for a man as brilliant as von Neumann, come on.
Yeah,
He's not some little kid
right. So why would he do that?
because he wanted credit for EDVAC.
Yeah.
I think he realized, in my mind, I think he realized that the stored program concept and electronic computers would be far more important in the world than his math, is what I think. And I think he wanted to be at the forefront, because John claimed that he used to, when von Neumann would speak, he would sit on the front row, and von Neumann wouldn't even recognize him. He never even acknowledged him.
Really? Wow.
And when they went to apply for the patent for the EDVAC, Goldstine and von Neumann had already applied. I mean, this is outrageous.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the computer history can't seem to bring these guys to justice. And I mean,
Well,
I'm
some-
still angry today. And of course, Arthur Burks is another one.
Yeah.
Arthur Burks he and his wife have done everything they can to belittle John Mauchly and to raise Ad Nassoff up to the extent of saying that the idea of the ENIAC came from Ad Nassoff. I mean, it's the most absurd thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
And when I had with their books, when I reviewed them on Amazon.com, he claimed that he claimed so many things that are wrong. He claimed that he never met with John Mauchly and told him that if he would put his name and Shaw's and Sharpless on the patent, that basically John's understanding was that he would testify for Sperry Rand against the Honeywell on the ENIAC patent, but otherwise he wouldn't. But anyway, and Kay sent an affidavit on it that what John told her when from the meeting, and Burks claimed it never happened on Amazon.com.
Wow.
Claimed it never happened. So, but as far as I'm concerned, I think that he told John that his reputation would suffer if he didn't do that. Well, the irony of it is that before they applied for the ENIAC patent. They asked all the engineers if they had anything to patent, and they all said no, that it was the system that was the, that was the thing, the whole system. Because a lot of the things they used, of course, they tried to use as many devices that had been in use for a long time. They didn't try to do something new.
Right. They wanted to build a reliable machine, so they wanted to use all reliable circuits and reliable techniques that had been proven before by other people. They weren't trying to invent.
And then Kay Mauchly had written that all of the stuff that John had done throughout his life that led up to the invention of the ENIAC. And Burke's, in the appendix of their book, does nothing but make fun of Kay and discounts everything that she says. And in his book, he said, well, of course, Press didn't say anything. But that isn't true. Press came over every day and worked with her. That article that she wrote was a combination of the two of them, although it had her name on it. I mean, so that, and he in his book also says that von Neumann should have given Press credit, but he didn't mention that he should give John credit. Well, I think the problem is that John's role in these design of these things was a similar one to von Neumann's, which is basically the software side of it. And I think that in order to, if you give John credit, then you have to take credit away from von Neumann. So basically, they've just assumed that, give no credit at all to John.
That's not fair.
Because Eckert, in his eulogy to John, says he's the most brilliant man he ever met. Now, he certainly worked with von Neumann. I mean, nobody doubts that von Neumann was brilliant.
Right.
Everybody admits that. The question is, was he ethical? And the answer is no.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should probably can we get back to the story for a little bit?
Yeah, okay, what do you want to know?
Okay, well, we had gone to, you were training other people to do Dick Clippinger's problem. This is after you worked on a problem, what was it, the tax or the...
Taub.
Taub. What was that?
From Princeton.
Yeah, what was the Taub problem?
Oh, I don't know the problem, really.
Yeah.
I have a citation for it, for having done it, but I've forgotten what it was called.
Yeah, okay.
But then after a year of working for the Moore School and doing Clippinger's problem,
yes,
then I wanted to leave, and I wanted to go and work on, the newer computers. So I wanted to work with Press and John.
Okay.
So I left, and I went to work for Press and John, which was called the Electronic Control Company. And when I went there, I was a programmer, and they only had two programmers, Betty Snyder Holberton and me. And Betty, when they started their company, they had three people that sponsored them. One was Prudential Life Insurance, and one was A.C. Nielsen, and the other one was the Census Bureau.
Okay.
So...
yeah, because they didn't have any money, so they needed somebody
well,
to sponsor
they had
them.
$25,000, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, some relatively small amount. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that Berkeley was the guy from the Prudential, and the reason Berkeley wanted a computer was that he was convinced that the Prudential clauses for their insurance refuted each other. He was sure that, that they weren't consistent.
Okay.
So he wanted it for a logical reason.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to check out these clauses.
Okay.
And A.C. Nielsen, of course, wanted to keep track of who was watching what to reduce their data.
Mm-hmm.
And then John and Press had already talked to the Census Bureau before they ever left Penn, when they were thinking about the EDVAC.
Yes.
They had already talked about, handling the Census Bureau's work.
Problem. Okay.
So, anyway, when I went there, Betty was doing both of us did for a while.
Now, Betty went there first?
Yeah, she was there, because she worked for them for nothing for a while.
Really?
Yeah, well, a number of
Okay.
the engineers worked for them for nothing
Okay.
till they got some money from the Census Bureau.
All right. These are engineers that had been at Penn
Well,
working on.
Bob Shaw and Betty and Fraser Welch, I think, of course, he was independently wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
but, people were inspired by Press and John.
Yeah. Well, they're they were remarkably capable people.
So anyway, we were doing sort merge problems, trying to do for the Census Bureau, and then when they decided to build the BINAC, then I moved over to do the trajectory for the Snark missile. The BINAC was designed supposedly to control the Snark missile.
Okay.
And that's why it was twin computers that checked each other each pulse time.
Okay.
So
it would be reliable. Yeah. So.
well, yeah, when
Okay.
you're controlling a missile, you sort of don't want it to make a mistake.
Right.
So
This was a contract from the Navy? Yeah, it
no,
must have been.
from Northrop Aircraft.
Oh, from Northrop. Okay. It
Northrop
was not a government contract.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, that's what I was working on. And then after we had been there for a while, Press came to John and said that he wanted 2 programmers. Well, by this time, a year had passed, and Arthur Gehring, who was one of them that I had hired, for my project at the Moore School,
Yep.
had come to work for Eckert Mauchly. So Press said he wanted 2 programmers because he had no engineers available to do this. So he wanted 2 programmers to check the to design a backup machine for the UNIVAC. He was afraid the Mercury delay line memory wouldn't work, so he wanted to design a backup machine using cathode ray tube storage.
Okay.
So he didn't want, it was a secret project because he didn't want anybody to know that he was worried.
Okay.
So anyway, John asked us to work, and I said, I was scared of Press because I was afraid of him.
Yeah.
I had never really been around him, and I said to him, if he ever yells at me, I'm out of here. So John said, I don't think he's going to yell at you, and he never did.
Okay.
And he also is a wonderful teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He's different than John. Their personalities are so different because John, he's one of the most responsive people that I think I've ever met. If you'd go up to him and you'd be singing a song, he'd sing with you. I mean, if you'd go up to him and quote some poetry, he'd quote some more. I mean,
Yes.
and he was a
okay.
terrible punster. I mean,
Okay.
John, well, Press, I never talked about anything personal with him. I mean, Press decided to talk to you. You didn't decide to talk to Press.
I see. Okay.
So so anyway, he said, we said, well, you know, we don't know anything about this. And he said, I'll teach you. So he wanted us to do the logical design, and he wanted it microcoded. Well, I think this was the first microcoded machine, and I mean, he taught us about Boolean algebra and all this stuff.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So he would come in twice a day, and we weren't allowed to talk to anybody about it
Okay.
except each other and him. So that's what we did. And then after we had done this for a while, he came in one day and he said, you know, I'm really worried about how long it'll take to debug the UNIVAC when it's built. So he said that he wanted us to check the logic. He wanted to make sure there were no mistakes in the logic of the UNIVAC.
Okay.
So he asked us to check the logic of the UNIVAC. So
Oh, so you're going to do a design review, a logic review. On
That's
the UNIVAC.
right. So,
okay, well,
well,
he's taught you logic. Now you know logic, so now you can, now I can ask you to do
that's
this.
right. So, well, Bernie Gordon, you know, gave a speech at the History Museum, and Bernie Gordon was one of the engineers. So,
I didn't know Bernie Gordon worked on that.
oh
really?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
he was a young man. I don't know why they say in his Wikipedia that he wasn't married. He was married when I met him.
Okay.
Anyway, Bernie Gordon, when Press said to them, you can't make any changes
Yes.
to the logic of the UNIVAC without clearing it with us. Well, he was horrified. I don't know whether, I mean, you know, engineers always think they were better than the programmers. And then, of course, men always think they're better than women.
Right.
So I don't know which he was most horrified by, that I was a woman or that we were programmers. But anyway,
Yeah.
I have always said that if you want to ingratiate yourself with somebody, do something for them that they have to do and they don't want to do. So they found out that when they made changes to the logic, we were going to trace it all around the machine and make sure all the other changes were made.
Yes.
So, voila, all of a sudden we were doing something they hated to do.
Okay.
So they loved us.
Okay.
In fact, one day, Bernie said to me, you must have a beautiful marriage. He said, you're so logical and you're married to an engineer. He said, my wife is so illogical. And I said, well, you know, Bernie, most decisions that are made in marriage are emotional, not rational anyway.
Right.
And I said, I have as much trouble as anybody else. Which, I mean, engineers like to believe that all their decisions are rational, not emotional,
Yes.
because
of
they
course.
cover it up.
Right.
But they're just as emotional as anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. They just have to train themselves to be logical so they don't make emotional decisions on engineering things. They just make logical ones on the engineering.
So then,
Yeah, so?
well, we found no major logical errors, by the way, and Bob Shaw had drawn those block diagrams in about 6 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I mean, it's amazing. And Bob Shaw was an albino, and he had to hold the paper. He had
Really
5 or
close.
6 inches from his face, and he had used great big 3x4 sheets of paper to draw them on. So, but he was, well, I've called him a Renaissance man, because he could do logical design, he could write, he could talk, he could do electrical design. He was very ingratiating, charming. I mean,
Yeah.
he was really a wonderful person. So then time passed, and one day press said, well, I'm really concerned because UNIVAC doesn't have any check circuits other than the odd-even check on the memory. So anyway,
One day?
one day press came in and he said he was really concerned that the UNIVAC didn't have any check circuits in it other than the odd-even check on the memory and on transfers. So I'm sure you all know what an odd-even check is, and that is that if the bits add up in a character, if the bits add up even, then you put check bit in so that it's odd, because if any time that it runs across an even character, then it signals an error.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we began, he said, you know, that if it's not checked in any other way, that we'll duplicate the circuit. So we immediately began to tell the engineers they had to duplicate circuits. Well, they went into orbit because they don't want to add equipment. I mean, so they said we were ruining their design, and we didn't know what we were doing and all this kind of stuff. So they were really in rebellion.
Okay.
So Jim Weiner, who was the chief engineer, couldn't really control them. So he had a meeting with press, and the meeting took about 10 minutes. Press said, here's the rule. He said, when you have a police department, you don't have every policeman checking every other policeman. You just have one policeman checking another police. You make sure that every police officer has one other checking them. And the assumption is that you don't have two corrupt policemen simultaneously. It's the same thing as here, that you must have every circuit looked at by at least one other circuit. And if it isn't looked at by somebody else, you duplicate. And that was the end of the meeting. They just left. I mean, and that was the end of the argument.
Okay.
I mean, so we put the check circuits in the UNIVAC.
Okay. Good. Very interesting.
So then my husband had taken a job in Washington, D.C., so I was going to move to Washington.
Now, he had been working at the Moore School all this time? Okay.
No, he didn't. He worked for a consulting outfit that did, his field was electrical noise.
Okay.
I mean, one of the jobs he did was to shield the centrifuge where they swung animals and astronauts around at Johnsville Naval Air Station to simulate gravity.
Yes.
So you could measure, you know, what the effects of G's of gravity would have on people. Mm-hmm. So he had the job of, because he had the job of shielding that centrifuge, because they put these sensors on the human body, and the signals from the body are, electrical signals are so small that if you have any noise in the system, you know, that it distorts what's going on.
All right.
So, so anyway, he took a job in Alexandria, Virginia, so I went to Washington with him while I fiddled around for a little, and then Press wanted me to, after we were finished with the check circuits, he wanted us to go back and finish the design of the backup for the UNIVAC.
A backup for the UNIVAC?
Well, that's the one I was telling you we were working on
originally. Yes. Oh, originally, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the design wasn't finished, and he wanted it to finish it. So I agreed. I traveled. I came up during the week and worked in Philadelphia and until Art and I finished it. Then I took a job with Rim Rand in Washington, and they had programmers.
Now, okay, had Remington Rand bought
Eckert
and bought
Mauchly.
Eckert's Eckert and Mauchly's company by now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was Strauss was in for a while from American Totalisator.
Yeah.
But then he was killed in an airplane crash, so they pulled out. So then they sold out to Rembrandt.
Yeah, because they just didn't have the finances to continue.
So isn't it interesting when they originally had gone to borrow money, banks couldn't see how they could ever use a computer?
Yes. Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting what bankers know or
Right.
don't know. So anyway, when I went there, the first thing that they wanted me to do was to train the Census Bureau UNIVAC programmers, because they were going to get a UNIVAC, you know. So that was the first job, and then they wanted me to go around with salesmen and tell about the UNIVAC.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. That was my first experience. One of the programmers for the Census Bureau was deaf, and I had never worked with anybody that was deaf, and they said, oh, she is so skilled at reading lips that you don't have to worry about her at all. Well, that isn't true, because, you know, when you talk, you should turn your head, you lower your head, you turn your back. I mean, so that you do have to know how to work with a deaf person. I mean,
yes.
Just if you go over and are looking at the paper and start talking, it doesn't work. You have to pull up their head and talk to them, you know?
Yes, yes, okay.
It's, so anyway, I did that. But these salesmen then would have me run around and tell about the UNIVAC, and then they would go in and sell them typewriters and comptometers and stuff. So they didn't, I mean, they had no sales plans for the UNIVAC. They had no commission schedule. I mean, and those salesmen didn't know a thing about the UNIVAC. So they just used me to get their foot in the door to sell something else. It was horrible.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, they just say, hey, we have somebody who really knows about these new computers. We want to come and tell you about it.
Right.
And so
you'd
they
get their
just
foot in
get you
the
to
door.
come
And,
in
yeah,
get educated.
it was terrible.
Oh.
So then, finally, Aviation Supply Office had one of their Cardex systems to handle inventory. So they were about to kick it out. So they had me see how the UNIVAC could do this system. Well, it was perfect for it. You know, I mean, that's exactly what the UNIVAC was designed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, inventory control and process shipping and reordering when your supplies get low and all this stuff, billing.
Yes.
I mean, it was wonderful. I was so excited because I finally had a job to do. So, anyway, they apparently were very worried that I wouldn't know. I wasn't a salesman and didn't know how to
make the customer happy.
Yeah, so they had Paul Chenitz from Philadelphia to come down to tell these guys how the inventory control problems worked, which they worked with it every day. I mean, it was idiotic. But anyway, the guy on the Cardex system, a new Cardex system they were thinking of, spent most of the day. And late in the afternoon, they had the guy from Philadelphia tell them about inventory problems. And then they finally had me on to tell them how the UNIVAC could do it. Well, they went wild. They were so excited. They were, it was amazing. When objection come up, one would object. I mean, they were answering their own objections.
They were arguing with each other, yeah.
It was absolutely fascinating. And Rembrandt had their VP of sales from New York to come down to be in on it, I guess, to see that.
Yeah. Well, this is an important customer.
It was fantastic.
Wow.
So they would not let me go to the banquet with them because they said they'd tell some off-color jokes and I'd be embarrassed. So I had lunch I had dinner with one of the commander's wives, because, you know, the people that ran it were commanders and lieutenant commanders.
Yes.
So they couldn't wait to get out of the dinner with them to come down and talk to me.
Okay.
I mean, it was really amazing.
Oh, that's great.
And guess what?
What?
They never let me give another presentation.
I would have thought they would have had you give
Wouldn't
them
you?
all.
Wouldn't you?
Wouldn't you?
You would think that, but nope. And they had me go out with Bledsoe, who was the assistant manager,
Mm-hmm.
and he sold pulpits before he worked for them. So he didn't know much about the UNIVAC, so he would almost tell lies and stuff like that. And then I would be there to answer technical questions afterward, because he couldn't answer any questions. That's all I did. So
You didn't enjoy this very much.
it was a job from hell.
Yes.
It was the most horrible job I ever had in my life.
Okay.
I hated it. So, anyway, my husband finally took a job with Rembrandt back in Philadelphia. Well, at that time, they didn't allow husbands and wives to work at the same site.
Okay.
So Bob Shaw's security clearance had been questioned, so he had to work off-site. Well, John's was too, and he couldn't work at the company.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
Have you heard those stories?
No.
Oh, well, guess what? I have John's FBI report. Kay, when the Freedom of Information Act came out, Kay and I wrote, Kay could access it, and she let me make a copy of it. Well, he belonged to Consumers Union, and that was considered a communist-oriented magazine. And they said he belonged to some Philadelphia engineering club, which he said he never joined. But according to the FBI report, it said Carl Chambers from the Moore School said he did. Well, John said he may have signed up for some literature one time at something, but he never joined it.
Yeah.
And then he hired such security risk as Bob Shaw. Well, Bob Shaw was an albino
Yes.
and obviously couldn't drive a car. But back in 1948, cars were not as prevalent as they are today. So Bob bought a car, and so people could drive him where he wanted to go, because he liked to go. He was very social. He liked to go places and do things.
Yeah.
Well, he had plenty of people that were willing to drive him
Yes.
to these places. So one weekend, one of his drivers wanted to borrow his car. He wanted to go to Washington, D.C. to visit a friend. So he did. He went to Washington, and his car was parked on the street, and he went upstairs to the apartment to visit his friend. Well, there was a parade in Washington that day that was considered communist-oriented, and the police went along and tagged the cars, took down the license plates of the cars that were on the street. And of course, Bob's was the owner of the car. Well, he wasn't even there, and the guy that was there wasn't even on the street. But anyway, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you'd have during the McCarthy era.
Wow. Okay.
It was terrible. And of course, one of the things they said, the report says that he spent a lot of time with the ENIAC women. Well, that's right, he did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
what was wrong with that?
Yes. Exactly.
And the president of Ursinus College, when he was there, didn't like his lectures. Well, John graduated, got his PhD during the Depression, and when he went to Ursinus as a physics, head of the physics department, they didn't even have anybody that needed to take physics. They had 3 students who were pre-med, and that's all. So when John went, he wanted to attract students. So he began to give lectures that would be interesting to students. And one of the lectures he gave was he put a board and he put roller skates on the bottom of it, and he came into the room and he put this board up on a lab table, and he got up there and demonstrated Newton's laws of motion on these roller skates.
Well, that's brilliant. Yes,
yeah.
all right.
Well, I mean, this is before skateboards, remember?
Yes, exactly.
So that was one of them. And then one lecture he used to give at Christmas time was on how to tell what's in a Christmas present without opening it using laws of physics. So yeah, the kids always had a party the night before their last day there.
Yeah.
So they were always pretty wasted. But they had to attend class the next day. So the professors used to dismiss them and let them go listen to John's lecture. And in fact, they would go themselves, and it got so big they had to have it in an auditorium.
Oh my goodness!
So
that's
I mean,
wonderful.
he would punch the package with
yeah, he'd use all sorts of
yeah,
techniques,
I
and
mean,
then relate
one
them
of
back
them
to
would have
physics.
a balloon in it.
Yeah.
So when he'd punch it, and
Oh,
then he
my.
would suspend it in water and weigh it, and of course measure it, and do all kinds of stuff like that. And so anyway,
So he was quite a performer.
oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, he needed students.
Hey, I had a chemistry professor at college that was the same way. People used to come, all sorts of people would come to the lecture because he just was such a showman.
Yeah,
But he was teaching chemistry too, but it's the same idea.
yeah,
Yeah, appeal to the kids.
yeah.
So they like the subject.
So let's see, what else was in there? That's mainly it. But they repeat this business about Consumers Union and that's engineering club over and over again in it.
Wow. Okay.
It's amazing.
All right.
So,
Well-
I mean, it's hard to believe today that people believe that stuff in the McCarthy era.
Yeah, it really is. And you're right.
Well, people got so they were afraid to talk about things on the telephone and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is how bad it was.
Yeah, it really was bad. Lots of people who.
So anyway, after I left Rimran, I stayed home and for 16 years and had children. Had 3 children.
Okay.
And then when I went back in the business, it was interesting. It was the mini computer was just coming in. So I never worried about mainframes again. I
Yeah.
worried about mini computers and communications.
Okay.
So,
Now you lived in the Philadelphia area?
well,
all this
yeah.
time? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So you had a home and you had raised your children.
Well, in the meantime, the kids, when I was divorced, I went back to work. I went back and got my master's degree at Penn, and I decided that if I didn't get a divorce, I was going to just teach school so I'd be home in the summer with the kids. But if I got a divorce, and I was planning, I probably would get a divorce, I had to go back in the computer business to earn enough money.
Right.
So I did file for divorce, and my kids, my son was 14, and my oldest daughter, I think, she's 5, 6, so she was 9, and Mary was 8 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
So my kids were small.
Yeah.
And then, and my ex-husband actually moved to California, and he really wasn't a factor in our lives after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, what could I do? Well, I was really interested. I went back to, I didn't know what I should do. So I went to Sperry Rand, and my buddy Arthur Gehring that I had worked with before. But at that time, actually, my husband was still there. So they didn't quite know what to do. But so anyway, they really didn't want to hire somebody. But he didn't stay there but a very short time afterward. So the people that I had worked with at Eckert Mauchly had formed Auerbach Corporation. And one of them was Isaac Auerbach, not Al, but Isaac.
Okay.
And one was Paul Windsor,
Okay.
who had worked there. Well, the other one had not worked there, he's Arnold Schaffer. But anyway, so I went there. Oh my goodness. They greeted me with open arms and said I could work with consultants and could work as a programmer, but publishing really wanted me.
Yep.
They said. So, gee, I went down and I took a editing test, and then I saw the reports they wrote, and they were very technical, and I thought, gee, that's the greatest way in the world for me to get back into the business, is to do technical reports, you know, to read them and to edit them.
Right.
So that's what I did, was to work for Eckert Mauchly's publishers. I mean, not Eckert Mauchly, Auerbach Corporation publishers.
Okay.
And developed a service on mini computers.
Okay. Very good. Well, those Auerbach reports were, everybody read them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah. In fact, one time I went into a hotel in Chicago to an ACM meeting, and here came old Grace Hopper. You know Grace Hopper.
Right.
So she stomped up to me, and she didn't say hello, how are you, or anything, and she said, what are you going to do about microprocessors? Because many computers were starting to be implemented, you know, using microprocessors.
Yes.
So, anyway.
Oh, my goodness.
So, anyway, I did that, and then I began working for many computer companies. I worked for Interdata, and I
Okay.
was market manager of their Mega Mini, and then I worked for Systems Engineering Labs in Florida. I was product support manager, and then I worked for Honeywell as a manager of many computer competitive analysis. And then I worked for
Oh, my goodness.
Data Decisions, as developed a communications project and then edited it.
Okay. Now, did you move around for these? Did you go to
Oh,
Florida
yeah.
and work
Yeah,
there?
I did.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, well, because I thought I would be vice president of one of these companies. It was interesting when I was in Honeywell in Minneapolis.
Okay, you were in Honeywell in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the men who was in communications and was well, I don't know. These corporation leaders, like the President of the United States, have kitchen cabinets
Yes.
that are people down in the corporation that tell them what's going on.
Right.
So one of the guys that was on the Spangles, who was head of Honeywell, he said to me, he said, you'll never be an officer of one of these companies. He said, you're too aggressive and you're too open. He said, the next generation of women will make it up the corporate ladder. He said, they'll go to business school and they'll have more finesse than you have. Well,
Okay.
the main thing I found that they learn at business school is never bring bad news to the CEO.
Yes.
And because I got punished. That's why I left these companies. I got punished for telling the truth.
Yeah. They don't want to hear it, and they, rather than doing something about it, they shoot the messenger.
That's right. They certainly do.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, that's certainly very difficult. So did you? So you went. About how long did you spend with these various companies, the SEL?
Well, I spent 8 years with Auerbach,
Okay.
Isaac Auerbach, because I learned a lot there. But finally, what he did was, the reason I actually left there was that one of the editors had suggested that instead of hiring people, they use freelance people, and he didn't have to pay benefits for them. That was the beginning of this benefit stuff.
Yep.
So he made him vice president. So of the company, well, Isaac was big on rewarding stuff like that. So anyway, it wasn't fun to edit these because you had nobody and you had these freelancers and they didn't know the products. I mean, they would just quote manuals. I mean, it was terrible.
Really?
So I spent so much time trying to fix up these reports and this kind of stuff that I decided I didn't need it anymore. So I decided I'd just go out and plus the other thing was I mistakenly thought my children were old enough so that I could move and it wouldn't bother them, but that isn't true.
Oh.
My oldest daughter tells me that's the worst thing I ever did to her was to move her.
Was to move her when she was still
Well,
living?
I moved when she was the year before she was a senior in high school.
Oh. Okay.
And then the other one was in, ninth grade?
Yep. Okay.
So it turned out I was wrong. To this day, my daughter hates to move.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
She said that was really terrible.
Yeah.
So
So she probably, well, yes, she tends not to move.
she what?
She would tend not to move then, yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't want to move at all. So I was there, and I really moved. I thought they were old enough, and then, as I said, it wasn't any fun working there anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Then systems. Interdata. Me and the marketing manager got kicked out basically because I was market manager of something called the Mega Mini, and they had a mini computer, a 16-bit mini computer, and it was the one that the president of the company had founded the company based on. But the thing that happened was a company in Japan had a microprocessor to emulate their mini.
Really?
And offered to sell it to them, but they didn't feel that they needed it. So they didn't buy it. So they were still using discrete elements, and everybody else was going to microprocessors. So they couldn't afford. I mean, they sold a lot of their minis,
Yeah.
but they didn't make any money on them because they had to cut the price. So most of the money they made was from the Mega Mini. So the market manager decided that what we should do is to cut out the 16-bit one and put our research and development in the Mega Mini, and where we made money. And the only person that went along with them was me. So we had the meeting with everybody, and the president of the company went ape. He was livid. He wanted us to bring back the 16-bit Mini. Well, you couldn't bring it back unless you got a microprocessor to implement it. So anyway, he basically fired the manager, and I say in Peter principle that I got the sidewise, the lateral arabesque. So what they did was they didn't fire me, but they moved me over to report to somebody that I considered beneath me, so to speak.
Yes. Okay.
So I left.
Yeah. Now the Mega Mini was the 32-bit machine.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Wow. All right.
So then, Bill Sweet, who was the manager, went to National Semiconductor. Now they were considering coming out with a microprocessor that emulated the PDP-11.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me to come to be the product manager of it. Well, I mean, I was crazy about digital equipment, and I was crazy about the PDP-11.
Yes.
And I didn't feel very comfortable doing that, because I really thought that DEC deserved, whatever they
Mm-hmm.
had with the PDP-11, so I didn't go.
Yeah.
So I went to Florida for Systems Engineering Labs. Now they were the only other competitor for a 32-bit Mini.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was product line manager. Well, there I got in the same problem of telling the truth.
Okay.
While we were there, I had a grand time for a while with the job, but anyway, eventually the marketing department kept saying that they didn't have any products to sell, any new products to sell, and the development kept saying if you'd sell what we have. Well, they didn't have anything but an old machine to develop products. I mean, it wasn't anything that the users want, because mainly their customers did link trainers for pilots. They sold.
Yeah, they sold a
systems.
lot of things
Yeah.
to control aircraft simulators. I remember that. They
So
had a very fast machine.
So anyway, finally they had an off-site meeting, and where we were supposed to discuss these things with the VPs and the presidents and the product
Mhm.
line manager and me. I was the only woman there. So anyway, the meeting started, and so this head of development kept talking about COBOL compilers and database management systems, and so then we had a coffee break. So my boss, who was the market manager, said, I haven't heard from you. And I said, well, this is idiotic. I don't have anything to say with such idiotic ideas. And so he said, listen, you're the only woman here, and I brought you here, and I expect you to talk. So I thought, well, I'll just let it all hang out. So I came back and I sat down. So I said, well, first of all, now I'd come with our main competitor, you understand.
Right.
So I knew what was going on. So anyway, I said that Interdata, when I was there, had the Bureau of Standards redo their math routines, and they doubled the throughput of their software. And I said, our math routines don't even give the right answers, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and we're not interested in COBOL compilers. We're in a Fortran environment completely.
Yep.
And that Interdata was coming out with a Fortran 4 compiler, and it was optimizing, and that it was going to run like greased lightning, and they were going to eat our lunch. So, and I said, and none of them care about COBOL compilers or database management. Well, the development guy was whispering in the president's ear, and nobody said a word, not a soul supported me. But guess what?
Yeah.
Immediately, almost immediately, the VP of development was ousted, and so was all his crew, and they were. But guess what? Nobody wanted to even talk to me.
Yes.
I mean, one of the product line managers said I didn't have the right to say such things. And one said, well, you were certainly right, but I certainly wouldn't say it at a meeting like that. So what they did, now this is what they did.
Yes.
They put new skins on the old computers and announced new systems. They did.
Really?
And yeah, and they told me to well, that VP of the company, let's see, what was the VP of sales, I guess it was.
Yeah.
He came up behind me. I was copying something at the copier, and he said, you'll have all new product managers for the new machines. And I said, what new machines? He said, you heard me. Well, I thought, what can I do? I mean, these are the same machines.
Yeah.
But so I sent the product bulletin for each of the product line managers and told them to fix it up for publication. Guess what? Not a one of them handed me back the product bulletin. Well, they hadn't changed, so why would they hand it back?
Yes.
So that's how
Okay.
come I left there.
Yes. You said, I don't need to be in a place like this. Yeah. Well, it was their, they proceeded to not do very well either. So,
Oh yeah, they sold. Well, my Sam Bosch, my manager, he told me. This is what he told me. Saw him in Arizona later,
yeah.
and he said that the president never forgave me because what he heard was that he had wasted his money. He paid $500,000 to get that VP of development out of his old job contract. He bought it out, and that he had wasted $500,000 to get him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he wasn't grateful.
He wasn't very happy.
No, he wasn't
Yes,
happy.
because basically, you pointed out that he'd made a big mistake.
That's what he heard.
Well, yes, it was true.
So then I went from there. They were setting up a competitive analysis at Honeywell. So I left systems to go to Honeywell, and as manager of Minicomputer. Now there's another situation.
Yeah, say roughly what year are we at, so I can sort of.
1978.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
because I was there from 78, 80.
Okay.
So anyway, the main thing they said that Spangle, the president, had set up this group so they could tell him how the Honeywell products competed in the marketplace. So they had a manager of competitive analysis for large systems and medium systems and mini computers, etc., communications.
Mm-hmm.
So they said that the first responsibility we had was to brief the president on how competitive their mini computers were. That was, for me anyway.
Yep.
And that we were going to have a half-hour presentation for him, and that's
Okay.
what we should prepare for. So time passed, and it got smaller and smaller, till finally we were going to have 5 minutes. So we had the meeting, and he was surrounded by these management types, and he wanted to ask us questions. They would, oh, we don't have time for that. We have to take you someplace else. So I never saw such a frustrated man in my life. And they hustled him out of there. I mean, they didn't want him to know the truth because their 66 was not, I mean, it wasn't competitive at all. I mean, so anyway, what happened was that the 66 was made in Phoenix, Arizona, and they wanted to come out with a new system. Well, at that time, the computers were 4 and 5 times faster than they were before, and the Honeywell, and the ones that are built by GE, were not very powerful, but they had gotten into multiprocessing. So they were one of the first companies that did multiprocessing. So that's how they made up for the fact that their systems weren't very powerful. So anyway, the users were kept telling them they wanted a more powerful system. So they wanted to come out with this system. Well, it was only 20% faster. It wasn't even worth coming out with a marketing campaign or anything. So anyway, they ousted Spangle, and the head of sales for the United States came in as president. Well, he hated that group at headquarters because, I don't know, it was a matrix management system. I don't know if you know what it is, but I mean, it's got to be the worst management system in the world. There was a person, you know, at headquarters advising the president who comparable to one in the field. So the rule, at least at Honeywell, was that they couldn't do anything out in the field that cost more than $1 million unless they cleared it with headquarters. So a lot of their projects, they managed to pare them down. So, I mean, plus this
Make a numerical rule and you will have unintended consequences.
So anyway, the guy that came in hated that group at headquarters, so he immediately disbanded it. I mean, I was supposed to work for somebody in the field.
Yeah.
So anyway, I left and went to Data Decisions, back in the publishing business.
Now, where's Data Decisions located now?
It was here in Cherry Hill.
Oh, okay. So you had a short stint in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Enough to have a winter or two.
2 winters.
2.
God, the first winter. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. I mean, the snow, it snowed so much that the snow was so high you couldn't see around corners. They had to come and haul the snow away at corners.
Oh my goodness, yeah, all right.
It was unbelievable.
Anyway, so you get back here.
So anyway, I came back here to develop a communications product.
Okay.
The woman who started it was Liz McEwen, and she got Bill Ziff of Ziff Publishing to back her in doing a technical publication that would compete with Arabac and DataPro.
Okay.
And she developed it so that supposedly they were going to cover everything in one product, but it didn't work that way. But so anyway, I was hired to work with Fonnie Reagan, who I'd worked with at Arabac, and to develop this communications project. So I came back, and we had a lot of fun developing it, you know, because many computers, you know, were the first that really used local area networks.
Right. Exactly.
And then the Army developed AutoDen, and then there was ARPANET.
Right.
And then Xerox had the Ethernet.
Right.
So, and the Wang had the WangNet. So anyway, I had a grand time writing reports about all these things, and we were there about, I mean, we were really quite successful. But anyway, Bill, Zeph, and Liz had a falling out over something, probably because of scheduled, not missing schedules. But anyway, she developed a PC product for PCs, and that's the one that went on and became a blockbuster success.
Mm-hmm.
PC Magazine's still around.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, Liz was ousted, and he had some people come down, and one of the biggest regrets that I have in my career is that when I was at Data Decisions, and Computer World was such a popular newspaper, and they didn't have anything comparable for communications.
Mm-hmm.
There was only the Communications magazine.
Right.
So I thought that Ziff Davis should start publishing a Communications World
Oh.
that would be quick and dirty, like
Yep.
Communications World. But the VP that I brought it up said that, they'd really like to buy rundown products and then build them up. They didn't like to start new products and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, it basically turned it down. Now, whether it ever went up to Bill Ziff, I don't know.
Yeah, whether he ever...
But anyway, it was rumored that Bill Ziff had Hodgkin's disease, and everybody was worried about it, what was going to happen to the company, because
Yeah.
Liz was gone, and the man that he put down there obviously didn't know what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Bill Ziff came down, and he was so gracious and charming, and told us how much crazy he was about us and what great plans he had for us. And 2 weeks later, on November the 13th, 1986, we came into work, and they said, as of 9 o'clock this morning, you're out of business. He sold him out to McGraw Hill. So that was it. Fini.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
And his sons, his sons weren't interested in publishing, they were in finance. Quite a number of years later, sold what was left of that PC and the magazines.
Yeah.
They kept that stuff. They sold it for almost $1 billion, imagine. Just what started there in Cherry Hill.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they did.
Wow. All right.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, so that was clearly
So
a good
anyway,
idea.
that was it.
Yeah, all right.
So then after years, I mean, nobody paid any attention to the ENIAC women until 1986. Catherine Kleiman, who was graduating from Harvard with a degree in social science, and she had chosen as her senior paper the women in the computer business. So she had heard of the ENIAC women, so she came down, and that's the first time we ever met her,
Okay.
was then. So, in any case, 10 years later, when they had, in 1996, she had called up Steve Brown from Penn, who was running the thing, what he was doing about the ENIAC women, and he said, nothing, I don't know anything about any ENIAC women. Well, it's sort of interesting because we worked for Aberdeen. We didn't work for Penn, so
Right.
he did not have our employment records, you know.
Oh.
because we worked for Aberdeen.
Yes.
We were located at Penn.
Yeah, but you were working for them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then Tom Petzinger, who wrote the up front column in the Wall Street Journal on Fridays,
Mm-hmm.
heard about us. So he called up Steve Brown, but he got the secretary. So the secretary said, "You sound like a woman that keeps calling me." Said, "Would you like her telephone number?" So she gave him Catherine Kleiman's telephone number, and they got together.
Oh.
And so he began, he interviewed, he spent a day with each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he came to the 50th anniversary. Well, Kay sat with the bigwigs because of John. And what did Billy sit with? Something. But anyway, the rest of us didn't do anything. I mean, just like an attendee. So he couldn't decide what to do with the story. He fiddled around with it. He was thinking about writing a book and all kinds of stuff. Well, finally in November 1996, he wrote 2 columns in the Wall Street Journal, in the up front column. One on succeeding Fridays about us. And then everybody was interested in us. That's when the interest began of people.
Good.
About the ENIAC women.
All right. So that was really that's what sparked it, was the
Yeah, that was what sparked
was
it.
the column and the
Yeah.
and the woman at Harvard who.
Well,
was,
yeah. Now she, yeah, I can't remember his name. The guy that sold Lotus to IBM. Oh, why can't I remember his name? Anyway.
Oh yeah, what is his name? Yeah. He replaced Mitch Kapoor as.
Kapoor is the one.
Oh.
Kapoor's the one that did it.
Oh,
yes.
okay. Mitch did it.
Mitch
Okay.
Kapoor, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
He
okay.
gave her $80,000 for, for the
to go,
documentary or
to
whatever.
go work on this, yeah.
On the ENIAC women. So what she did was to hire a professional group, and she acted as the questioner, and they came around and spent a day with each of us and filming, and so those are the records that she wants to make a documentary of.
Ah,
Is that.
very good.
That's what.
Okay. But she hasn't, yeah, she's still
She's
working
never
on.
gotten the money.
Yeah, she needs some more.
Well, she spent some money on. Tom Petzinger's wife was also a writer, of writing a script for it. Now, I believe she has a script, but I've never seen it.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I think her agreement with us has run out. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But anyway, she's still trying to.
Still working on it. Still.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never met her, but I've certainly heard of her. And,
Yeah, well,
seen
she's
some correspondence from her.
she's an internet lawyer. She wears one of her big things is domain names.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Very
So-
good. Well, that's how she must have met Mitch, because he's very interested in the Frontier Foundation, which is, trying to preserve privacy and things like that on the internet. Very good. Okay. Now, what happened? What happened to the different ENIAC women?
Oh, okay.
Kay. Now let's see. Kay. When did she married John?
Yes.
Often?
Now.
How did that?
Yeah.
When did that happen?
Well, I don't know if you know, but John's wife in 1946. They went down to the seashore one, I guess it was probably Friday night, and got down there about 9 o'clock or 1, and they went out swimming in the nude in the ocean.
Okay.
And she got caught in an undertow and was swept away. And he was running up and down the beach, you know, trying to get help. And her body washed up down the beach the next day.
Oh, no.
So she died then.
In 1946?
I believe it was in August of 1946. I'm not sure
I see.
whether it was August
I
or
didn't
September.
know that. I did not know that piece of history.
Yeah, and then when did I believe he and Kay were married in 1948,
Okay.
like the spring of 1948. I know the first time he did anything socially was for my wedding, because I had asked him to give me away.
Okay.
So when I asked him, he said, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to give you away. You're too valuable to be given away. What's the big idea of giving you away?"
Oh.
So anyway,
He was really charming.
but he did give me away.
Okay.
And Kay had a engagement party for me.
Very
And I
nice.
think that's the first social function that he ever went to after his wife died.
Oh, wow.
And then Betty and her family had a reception for me
Oh,
at their
wonderful.
house. So
Oh, that is
Yeah.
really nice.
they were really wonderful.
That's great.
So then Press's wife, I mean, she also died tragically. The two of them had a son named John,
Mm-hmm.
and then about a couple years later, they had a son named Chris, and she went into postpartum depression and was in a mental institution thereafter, and she came home one weekend for a visitation, and she took the oldest boy. She overdosed on drugs and went to bed and with him in her arms, and they came and found her dead and with that little boy asleep. It was terrible.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was terrible. So
Well, the boy died too?
no,
No, he did not die.
no, but now
she-
he had
but-
a tragic life because he went
Can you
to
imagine
he was
having that
brilliant.
in your life?
huh?
Just having been to grow up, knowing that happened.
Well, it's and the one. Well, it affected both of them, I'm sure. But the one, Chris, is the one that I know, and I have a picture of him with me, and Bill Mauchly, in this thing.
Oh, wow.
Chris is the one that she never recovered from, you know.
Yeah.
So he always felt, I think, according to one of his friends, he always felt that his father blamed him for her death.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was suicidal. So one time, my Art Gehring, I never saw Press's office, by the way.
Really?
No, I never was in it. I didn't even know where it was. Well, he came to talk to me. I didn't, you know, that's the way he worked. He went from group to group, you know.
Yes.
And he chose to talk to you. You did not choose to talk to him.
Okay.
So one day, though, Art, for some reason, went into his office, and he came back and he said, you know, I went into his office and Press opened this drawer and it was full of drugs and stuff.
Oh, my goodness.
And he explained, he said that Hester was, you know, would overdose on drugs, so he had no drugs in his house. Everything that anybody needed, he had in this desk drawer in the office.
Oh my goodness.
So, he's afraid she'd commit suicide. Well, she did. I mean, after the first child was born, he bought her a gold Cadillac convertible. It was beautiful. Yellow.
Wow.
I mean, it was really yellow. And Chris, now this John was brilliant. Well, John went to Vietnam and was wounded. And he got hooked on drugs, during the recuperation, and for the rest of his life. He was off and on, hooked on drugs and alcohol.
What a tragedy.
And he only died, I don't know, maybe it's 3 or 4 years ago by now. But Chris he's very bright, but he's not press bright.
Yes.
And he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and he's in the computer business.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I'm very.
Yeah. Now he's Eckert did not marry one of the ENIAC women. He married somebody else.
No. No, he was already married.
When he
when I met
arrived
him.
at
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
he may have gotten married when he first started the project back in '43 or.
Yeah, because she was a draftsman.
Okay.
Hester was a draftsman for them.
Okay.
Then Press's second wife, he was a widower for quite a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was always interested in music and stuff. So he was singing in some choir, and he met Judith
Okay.
singing in this choir.
All right. All right. So that's how they met. Good. Are there any other stories about the?
Well, the history of the ENIAC is very interesting. I mean, Penn wants to claim it for itself, and Aberdeen doesn't want to claim anything. And I found it interesting when Aberdeen did the 50th anniversary. They never even mentioned Press and John. Everything they did, the soldier salute and everything for Goldstine. It was all Goldstine and von Neumann. It was unbelievable. The only thing they had Kay and Judith, his second wife, cut the cake, but that was it. And the only thing they had that amounted to anything was they had the ENIAC women a seminar on us. We sat and discussed what we did, and the one said after it was moved to Aberdeen as well as.
Yeah.
And the rest of it was trash. They brought Gillian's, Colonel Gillian's family from Europe to come, and the keynote speaker was von Neumann's daughter. She's an economist. It was absolutely the worst thing. And I had never seen Goldstine's book before. They gave us Goldstine's book.
Oh.
And that's when
that's when you
realized
started to go.
I couldn't believe
Go ballistic.
he's such a liar.
Wow. All right.
How on earth could you write a book and tell lies like that?
Yeah.
It's really horrible.
I don't know.
Well, I find Princeton Press, I have no respect for them whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
All right. I'd like to ask you a few sort of general questions, maybe
Well, let me tell you one story.
Or I'm
think
always
is
open
very
for
funny.
a story. Okay, good.
Well, Kay and I, of course, were the main ones that talked, have been, given speeches around about our experience, because Ruth died in 1986. Marlon, as I said, married a dentist and wasn't there. And Betty had a stroke in 1991, and Fran came in late, and she has never really been interested. So Kay and I mainly went around, but it was interesting. The women of Microsoft invited us out for several days.
The women of Microsoft, all right.
So, well, Bill wasn't in town, so we didn't get to meet him. But anyway, one of the events that we went to, they had for us, they had their women managers at Microsoft. And we were at a big round table, and there were about a dozen of us. So we didn't know each other, and when we went in there, we didn't quite know what to say to each other. So we were sitting there, and finally one woman piped up and said, "What are you women really doing?" And we said, "Well, what we're trying to do is to set the record straight, because the wrong people have gotten credit for things." "Well, you should have heard them."
That set them off.
Oh my goodness, they were telling about the stories of who was getting credit and didn't deserve it, and who didn't get credit.
Oh my goodness.
The whole luncheon, I mean, it was. So it's still going on today.
It still goes on. That's funny. That's really good. That's great. I guess one thing, if you were to, give advice to, to young people that are just sort of starting out on the career, especially women, do you have any? What would your advice be?
Well, it's interesting for me to. The Sisters Network. I access a Sisters Network and get all their postings, so I know what the women are saying today.
Okay.
And the thing that I find so interesting is that the women today are still trying to find an even playing field for their daughters.
Wow.
And I do, and of course, I always found it very interesting that Lawrence Summers got fired from Harvard for his remarks about saying that women, they had intrinsic ability and blah, 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 like that. I mean, it's pretty horrible that such attitudes still prevail. But the guy at Honeywell said to me, the next generation of women will make it. But the women today are still worried about it, and they tell the stories of the discrimination against women that's unbelievable in this day and age.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I mean, the problems of who is responsible for taking care of the children and all that kind of stuff, I mean, it's still primarily the woman's responsibility.
Okay.
So it was interesting. There's a group called the Girl. They just gave me. They were just here last week. I'd never heard of them before, but these women believe in open source everything.
Okay.
I mean, in the Linux operation system, and they believe that the internet should really make it a flat world. But the thing that they were saying to me was that the internet is English. And so that one of the things that they're trying to do, they speak English on the internet, is to get people to be able to communicate with all these countries of the world who don't speak English. Now, for example, one of the girls that was here, one of the women that was here, was Portuguese. Now, I believe she was telling me that she's trying to provide this service for Ecuador. And, but anyway, the woman that I talked to that arranged this meeting for them to come down and meet me, her husband, when she got married, she made sure that it was going to be an equal situation. She was not going to marry anybody that expected her to take care of the kids and be responsible for them completely and stuff. So she does just the opposite. He's the house husband, and she works in New York during the week and only comes home on the weekend. Can you believe this? And her husband is studying he doesn't like the computer field, and he's studying to be a fifth grade school teacher. It's interesting, isn't it?
Hey, if they can work it out that way, more power to them. Exactly.
Well, I found it amazing. They said to me, "What do you think of open source?" And I said, "What do I know about such things?" But I said, "Sounds like a good idea." But I really don't know anything about it.
Yeah, okay. You know, you had a long career. What would you say was your proudest moment when you think back?
I would say it would have to be the day of the introduction of the ENIAC, when the trajectory ran, so brilliantly.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, it really fulfilled all expectations. I don't think I've ever quite had as thrilling a moment as watching that trajectory run. Exactly the way it was
supposed to, in front of all those people.
In front of all those people, yeah.
Okay.
The best job, though, and I've called Eckert and Mauchly the technical Camelot.
Yeah.
I have a copy of what I wrote about that. That was by far, and I think it was everybody else who was there, that it was a magical place. I don't think anybody ever had as much satisfaction as they had working for Eckert and Mauchly.
You mean at their company, or
at their company?
At their company when they first started out.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I loved those men.
Yeah.
I didn't just like them, I loved them.
Okay.
I mean, I would have done anything for either one of them.
Yeah.
They were so open. I mean, they were so, you could ask them any question in the world. And it's funny, but as brilliant as they were, they never made me feel stupid. They never made fun of a question you asked. They answered it. They usually saw it as more complex than I even thought of.
Than you thought of when you were asking. Yes.
And
okay.
so they didn't just answer it. I mean, they really covered the subject, and
okay.
It was. And my IQ went up when I worked with press. I've always said that because he was so focused, that you became very focused, and you were the most important person in the world when you were talking to him. It's true,
Mm-hmm.
because he listened to every word. People don't listen. I mean, when you did something for him and reported to him about it, he listened to every word.
Yeah. He was really interested in it.
I mean, so when you're taking that seriously, it's a big high.
Yes. Feels really good.
And, I mean, you wanted to do everything for him.
Yeah.
I mean, both of them, I felt that way about both of them, and they complemented each other so well, because John said that the thing about press was, he said when he would give him an idea, press would say, "Well, we can do it if we're careful." And he said he never poo-pooed any of his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
He always considered it. I mean, he says that he believed that press was the greatest component engineer, at the country at that time.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of components.
In terms of of taking ideas and realizing them.
Yeah.
Something that worked.
Well, the way he used components. I mean,
Okay.
Because he told me, this was interesting, at the 86th, at the 40th anniversary, I sat with press. And at that time, the UNIVACs had been bought by the IRS, and they were all making mistakes. And I sat with press, and I said, Press, how on earth can the UNIVACs be making mistakes? And he said, well, I'll tell you how. He said when he stopped being chief engineer, where he used to design so that components never had to work more than 50 to 55% of their capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And when the next chief engineer upped it to 80 to 85%. So when a component doesn't work up to par, that the point is when you have more than one that doesn't work up to par, then you very quickly cause problems.
Yes, exactly.
He certainly, I mean, somebody like that could never have gotten the ENIAC to work.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Wow. All right. Now, one thing are there any things, that I have, that you thinking about what we've been talking about that you think, we glossed over and you want to roll back and tell me about it?
Well, the one thing I want to tell you, why was I very successful and Betty very successful, and we were very successful in a man's world? Why were we so successful? Okay. Well, I think it's because we were great finishers. Betty was the best finisher I have ever seen in my life. You know how most people like to do the fun part of a job.
Mm-hmm.
But then for all these nasty little details, they don't like to do them. Engineers are the same. Well, Betty and I were great finishers, and when she finished a job, she had thought of everything. Absolutely everything, and it was ready to go. That's why Press and John gave her the console to develop. I mean, she was the final arbiter of the instruction set, and she told this story, which I love to tell, about Johnny von Neumann. One time, she was at a meeting where Johnny von Neumann was enunciating his perfect instruction set. So he was telling, what it should be, and Betty piped up and said, "You forgot one." So he sort of amused and sort of tolerantly asked her, and just what would that be? And she said, "The stop instruction." And he said, "You're right." But anyway, that was her. In fact, Grace Hopper called her the greatest programmer she ever met. Now, when Betty was told, she laughed, because she said, "Well, Grace, that if you can do anything better than she can, you have to be the best in the world." And so Grace had said this because Grace had a compiler that was making errors, and she couldn't find what the error was. So she asked to borrow Betty from the Bureau of Standards, which is where Betty was at that time, if she could borrow her to find this error. And Betty found it in 3 days. And what had happened was that when you wrote on the mag tape, every time you wrote on it, you had to put the labels on again, because the tape was about 1,500 feet long. So when you wrote on it again, even though it was the same amount of data, you might come up with a slightly different place.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have garbage in between that and the label,
right,
or it might be slightly over the label. So
Yes.
that's what Grace had done. She hadn't rewritten the label. Now, when she was primarily responsible for the Fortran compiler, for the Fortran language to standardize it, because when the committee had left and said that here's a standard, well, Betty saw it and she couldn't even program with it. So she had a manager in Washington who believed in her enough, so she called the committee back, and they worked and made it standard. And she was the one that developed the test routines to test to make sure that it complied with the standard. And she was on the COBOL committee, and she was always on these things. She was supposedly just a recorder, but she was the one that kept him honest, is what people have said to me all the time.
Very
Yeah,
good.
and I mean, they sent her on troubleshooting all the time. I mean, NATO, they sent her to NATO, to Italy, and she told about that time she was there to find out what was wrong. And they had the windows open, and the cars were in the street honking, and the fumes and stuff were coming up. That certainly wasn't any good for tape drives.
Oh,
So their problem was that their environment wasn't clean.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
so we were finishers. When they gave us a job, they could depend on the fact that we would finish it.
Yeah.
We didn't just do the fun part.
Yeah.
We did the nitty-gritty
Did all of
things.
it.
Yeah.
Good.
So I believe that was, the main reason that we were given jobs.
Okay, that's very good. I'm glad you brought that one up. What would you say were the most important lessons that you learned during your career?
Well, I think you should do what you love. I think that because it's not work, really, when it's not that much work when you do what you like to do. But when you're doing what you don't like to do, it's really drudgery. So I believe that for temporarily, you can do what you really don't like to do, but I think that as your career, that you really should move on if you don't enjoy doing it, because life's too short not to enjoy what you're doing.
Good.
The other one, of course, is luck beats brains. I told you that before.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this oral history interview for the Computer History Museum. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank you for asking me.
All right.
I'm flattered.